What happens when the cold, confident Draco Malfoy faces the most embarrassing challenge of all, falling in love? In today's video, we dive deep into Draco's mortifying and unexpected journey through crushes, awkward moments, and heartbreak. Get ready for drama, laughs, and a side of vulnerability you've never seen before. Trust me, you don't want to miss this.
Chapter 1: An Unsporting Attack. As a man of means, Draco Malfoy could have chosen to live a life of leisure, political meddling, and casual blackmail, like his father before him. However, his acquittal by the Wizengamot was accompanied by strong recommendations that young Mr. Malfoy strive for such laudable pursuits as the common good, altruism, and redemption in the public eye. And so, after a few years of sowing his wild oats, and a great many curses, on the continent, Draco had returned to London, where he made short work of the Auror training program, 3 years down to 1.5, if you please, and joined that noble office. Draco had been strategic in his choice of career, of course, being an Auror offered just enough heroics for positive coverage in the news and just enough ministry-sanctioned murders to keep him interested in the job. Draco was an excellent Auror. Something about very nearly becoming a dark wizard himself gave him rather useful insights into the minds of naughty wizards and witches. The problem with competence, however, was that it was rewarded with increasingly complex cases by the head of the Auror office, a certain Madame Nymphadora Tonks. And so, our opening scene, a Monday morning, sometime in January. Amidst the graying cubicles of the Auror office, Tonks was doling out the month's Class A assignments to her top Aurors like a vindictive Father Christmas. Montjoy, you're off to Heathpool. 3 Muggle children found dead with their livers removed. That hag coven from Stowe may have regrouped. A folder containing the case material was slapped onto Montjoy's desk. Buckley, suspected necromancy and other foul play, Olive Man. Buckley accepted the proffered case file with a grimace. You're to take Humphreys with you. Mind you be a good mentor and don't traumatize her too much. Tonks rounded the corner to the next cubicles. Potter, Weasley, you're to continue with the vampires in the Dales, but if you don't make further headway, I will get personally involved. Half of Yorkshire will be sucked dry at this rate. Goggin, some idiot is experimenting with transmogrify and torture on Muggle prostitutes in Glenluce. I won't notice if you bring him in with a few missing appendages. Tonks now came to a halt in front of Draco's desk. Malfoy. Since you did so well with the Lanark lunatic last week, I'll let you pick your poison. Draco eyed Tonks guardedly. Poison was unlikely to be an exaggeration. What are my options? Tonks dropped 2 files onto Draco's desk. Option 1, a wizard accused of inappropriate acts with trolls, a real delight for the senses, that one. Or, Option 2, a request from the Minister for Auror protection of a high-profile target. Inappropriate acts? Repeated Draco, pulling the folders towards himself. I don't know about your tolerance level, but I've quite lost my appetite. Tonks jutted her chin towards the rightmost folder. There are photographs for your edification. Draco made the mistake of opening the troll folder. He closed it again with a strangled sound of disgust. I'll take the protection assignment. Right-o, said Tonks, swiping the troll folder and its hideous contents from Draco's desk. The troll buggerer will go to Fernsby. Fernsby. Come here. Fernsby emerged from a distant cubicle. Tonks slapped the folder into his chest. You are off to Morpeth. I hear the North Sea is lovely this time of year. If Fernsby had reservations about the loveliness of a January sojourn by the North Sea, he kept them to himself. Tonks was rarely worth arguing with. Progress reports on my desk by Monday morning, called Tonks to the office at large. A grumble of assent from the Aurors followed the request. Tonks gave Draco a sharp look. Looking forward to yours, Malfoy. I've a degree of curiosity about that one. The target is working on some top-secret project. They wouldn't even tell me what it's about. Tonks made her way back to her office, managing to tread on an unsuspecting colleague's foot only once. Draco, now rather curious, pulled the folder towards himself. The protection request came straight from the minister's office and Shacklebolt had requested a security audit, defensive warding, every confidentiality-enhancing measure known to wizardkind, escorting, if you please, and protective surveillance, in sum, the bloody works. Draco was preemptively irritated. This sounded rather a lot like effort. And who, pray, merited this extravagant treatment. He flipped over a few more pages of ministerial demands to find, finally, the principal. And it was Hermione. Bloody Granger. Her photograph was pinned to the top of a brief biographical note, as though anyone alive today didn't know her and her hair. She looked seriously at Draco, blinked at him once, then left the frame. Draco seized the folder and headed for Tonks' office. She was rarely worth arguing with, but this case file merited an especial attempt. Tonks, I can't take this one. You'll have to give it to someone else. Tonks looked up from the parchment she'd been attacking with a quill. Her hair turned a quizzical mauve. Why ever not? It's Granger. That's the principal. Hadn't you seen? And? We don't exactly get along, said Draco in a vast understatement. Are you telling me that some school-time unpleasantness from 15 years ago will interfere with your ability to carry out this assignment? Asked Tonks. In the faux glass behind her, shadowy silhouettes clustered about, as though keen to eavesdrop on the drama. We have a rather unhappy history, said Draco. Worse than you and Potter? This, Draco considered for a moment. Finally, he answered, in some ways. Fine, sniffed Tonks. Swap with Fernsby. I'm sure he'll only be too happy to change out a cushy protection jobby for the troll aficionado. Isn't there anything else I could take? Tonks gave him a quelling look, emphasized by her eyes turning a dangerous, hawkish kind of yellow. I've just assigned the month's missions, Malfoy, and I won't have your complex about Granger domino its way through the entirety of it. I don't have a complex about Granger. Good. Then you'll do fine. Off you go. Tonks waved her hand and her office door closed slowly, squeezing Draco out. Draco strode back to his desk, half intending to ask Fernsby for the swap. However, the gurgle of horror emanating from Fernsby's cubicle was sufficient to change his mind. Fine. He'd do the Granger thing. It was, at any rate, not troll pornography. Hilda. Draco sent Granger a coldly professional note stating that he would be pleased to meet with her at her earliest convenience to discuss the minister's protection request. Granger sent back an equally cold note indicating that the minister's request was an overblown reaction on the minister's part and that she would be dealing with it shortly, and to please disregard it. Draco did not respond, but enjoyed an afternoon off instead of informing Tonks of this fortunate development immediately. Then Granger ruined everything by writing again, indicating that, to her disappointment, the minister had not changed his mind, and was forging ahead with this, disproportionate and illogical, in her opinion, plan of action. Would Draco be available to meet at 9 o'clock this Thursday? The Granger Laboratory. Trinity College, Cambridge. As he tossed the missive into the fire, Draco thought, Cambridge, of course. How could we expect anything less from Hermione Granger? Hilda. That Thursday, Draco arrived at Trinity College at the beastly hour of 9 o'clock. The porter at the gate didn't glance twice at his robes. Many of the muggles wandering about were wearing long black gowns, but he did give Draco a sharp look when he said he was there to see Granger. Dr. Granger, said the porter. Have you got an appointment, sir? Yes. Name? Malfoy, said Draco. The porter consulted a chart. He found whatever he was looking for, apparently, because Draco was waved in towards the Verdant Quad at Trinity College. It's not a quad, we call them courts at Cambridge, said the porter to some tourists, but Draco paid him no mind. He knew a quad when he saw one. Granger's note had included a few directions on how to enter the wizarding part of the college, which brought Draco to a magically concealed door at the south end of the quad. A Muggle plaque indicated that King's Hall had once stood here, but that it had been destroyed in the 16th century. Draco tapped the bronze plaque with his wand, as instructed by Granger, and the ostensibly destroyed King's Hall appeared before him. Draco decided that Granger earned a 2 out of 10 in his initial security assessment. At least rogue muggles wouldn't immediately be able to find her. And, with that generous thought, he strode into magical Cambridge. At 9 o'clock on a weekday, King's Hall was a roiling bustle of scholarly witches and wizards, off to advance magical knowledge. Draco had spent years at the Université de Paris to earn his bachelor's in alchemy and his mastery in martial magic, dueling, but he'd never set foot in an institution of higher learning in the UK. King's Hall retained its 16th century ambience, dark, an excess of over-carved wood, and candlelight, and vacillated somewhere between pure Gothic and early Renaissance in decor. As he surveyed the crowd before him, varyingly studious or eccentric looking, Draco wondered how much of Wizarding Britain's brain power was located within these hallowed halls. At any rate, there was at least one big brain on the premises. Quite lost amongst 5 staircases on the first floor, he decided to inquire for directions towards that brain. "You there?" said Draco, jutting his chin towards a spotty youth. The boy looked about 22, serious, and clutched a text on advanced theoretical arithmancy to his chest. "Yes?" asked the youth. "I'm looking for Granger," said Draco. The boy frowned at him. "Professor Granger. Her offices are on the 3rd floor, with the other fellows." "Cheers," said Draco, wondering how many more times he was going to be corrected regarding Precious Granger's title today. He climbed the stairs and passed corridors where he spotted a variety of interesting things: classrooms, lounges, reading rooms, offices, an apothecary, a cafe, and what appeared to be a small zoo. Finally, he came to a door which simply said, "Granger. Ring for attention." "See? There. No overzealous titles." Draco rang for attention. Then he peered into the narrow window that flanked the door and almost turned around to leave again, because the laboratory beyond seemed decidedly muggle and he must have taken a wrong turn somewhere, only it said Granger, right there. His ring was answered by a being in a bright white coat and strange translucent face coverings. "Can I help you?" asked the being. "I'm looking for Granger," answered Draco. "Healer Granger doesn't take walk-ins," said the being, with a rather stiffened back. "Is she expecting you?" "She is," said Draco, adding this new title to the increasingly ridiculous running list. "All right," said the being, with what was probably a suspicious look, but Draco couldn't tell behind the goggle things. "Her office is down to the right." The being moved out of the way. From the voice, Draco was now relatively certain it was a human female, but the accoutrements made it difficult to say. In any case, Draco was in. His initial assessment of Granger's security measures plummeted to a strong 1 out of 10. It pleased him to give Granger a well-deserved horrid mark. It didn't please him to think of the work that would be involved bringing this place up to snuff. He knocked on the office door. "Come in," said Granger's voice. A blast from the past, crisp, prissy, impatient. Draco entered the office. Granger was sitting behind a tidy, if overstacked, desk. They stared at one another in a decidedly awkward moment, something that Draco, now a fully qualified and rather dangerous Auror, was not used to anymore, and perhaps, judging by the unhappy set of her mouth, neither was Granger. Time heals all wounds, but between himself and Granger, there were a great many to heal, and right now, 15 years felt like a rather short time since they'd been children fighting each other on opposite sides of a war. Draco couldn't recall when he had last spoken to her directly, and he certainly knew he'd never been alone in a room with her. Granger rose to greet him with the following display of eloquence: "Malfoy." "Granger," said Draco, with equal eloquence. She gestured to a chair across the desk. As he stepped towards it, Draco found himself being assessed by her. Her gaze flitted from his hair to his face, to the Auror insignia on his chest, and down his black robes to his boots. Seeing that they were dispensing with the niceties, Draco shamelessly assessed her in return: the hair, a curling pile coiled high at her crown; the face, thinner, more severe than he remembered; the same strange white cloak as the being; the black jeans, so muggle; the casual trainers. Draco opened his mouth to make a few vague opening remarks, some chatter about Cambridge, or Potter and Weasley, or other such fluff, but Granger jumped straight to the point. "This is an absolute waste of Auror resources." The lack of finesse was quite typey for Granger. Some things didn't change. Draco settled himself into his chair. "Give me a bit more to go on and I can make a case to Shacklebolt to withdraw the request. I've no more desire to be here than you." Granger pursed her lips at him. Draco wondered when McGonagall had apparated into Granger's chair, and where Granger had got to. "All right," said Granger at length. "A fortnight ago, I updated Shacklebolt on the progress of a certain research project. A research project which is not under the Ministry's purview, nor funded by it, by the by. I was sharing what I thought was a bit of good news with a longtime friend and mentor, who happens to be the Minister of Magic. Apparently, the news was too good. Shacklebolt fears repercussions, as the project will have implications for a certain segment of the population." "What implications?" asked Draco. "Which segment?" "I'd rather not say, as my hope is that you won't be involved any further than this meeting." Shacklebolt is overreacting. I shall speak with him again this week and convince him that putting me under Auror surveillance is utterly unnecessary. Auror protection, corrected Draco. Aurors of his caliber weren't assigned to 2-bit surveillance jobs, thank you. Call it what you will, said Granger. Shacklebolt has his flaws, but a propensity for overreaction isn't one of them, said Draco. There wasn't much love lost between himself and the minister, but there was a certain respect. No, it isn't one of his propensities. Which is why I was rather surprised, dismayed, really, by his decision to involve your office. Is it possible that he isn't overreacting? The look Granger leveled at him was decidedly unfriendly. No. You don't think that this breakthrough, or discovery, of yours is putting you at any new risk whatsoever? Not at the moment. First, no one knows about this development, other than Shacklebolt himself and, to varying degrees, my staff, all of whom I trust implicitly. And, secondly, though I've made a breakthrough, I haven't quite solved the issue yet. That will be the work of at least another year. I won't be on the front page of the Prophet asking to be murdered tomorrow. Draco's eyebrow twitched upwards. Shacklebolt thinks you're going to be murdered? He thinks, probably rightly, that some people won't be pleased about my breakthrough. Draco decided that he needed to speak to Shacklebolt. Perhaps he'd be less cagey than Granger and disclose something useful to the Auror assigned to her. He found himself truly curious, now, about the nature of this good discovery. His next question was carefully phrased. He didn't want to cast aspersions on Granger's heritage, gods forbid, he was already on thin ice everywhere on that front, but there were things she mightn't know, as a Muggle born. Might Shacklebolt be aware of certain wizarding predilections or biases that you aren't, that would be a cause for concern? Granger took a breath, as one might if one was summoning one's remaining patience. If I told you I'd solved world famine, or something equally wonderful, would you pause to worry about the actions of a few naysayers? One naysayer would be enough to dispatch a do-gooding researcher, especially one who keeps her laboratory secured with a third-rate locking charm and some chicken wire. One of Granger's knees began to bounce. It brought to mind a cat twitching its tail in annoyance. So have you? Asked Draco. Have I what? Solved world famine. Nothing so grand. That was an example. Where do you keep your findings? Asked Draco. Now it was Granger's turn to raise an eyebrow, which was the entirety of her response. Draco gestured to the office around him and the laboratory on the other side of the door. I've identified a dozen vulnerabilities already, and that's only what I saw in the 5 minutes it took to walk up here. If I wanted to work it out, I rather think I could. Do you? Yes. Seeing Granger smirk was something. However, it rapidly disappeared. If we're talking of physical security, I haven't exactly had a reason to increase it beyond the usual measures until recently. I can assure you that I'm capable of warding my laboratory beyond a locking charm, and keeping my data safe. Perfect, said Draco. Proceed with that. I'll be back in a few days to do a penetration test. If you satisfy that, and implement any additional measures I recommend, we may be able to convince Shacklebolt that you and your research are safe, and we'll be able to put this behind us. This challenge was doled out with a, quite laudable, Draco thought, minimum of arrogance on his part. Granger's eyes grew hard. The challenge was recognized and accepted. Fine. And when will this penetration test take place? I'm not giving you a warning, said Draco, rising. Do you think a real-world threat would? Brilliant, said Granger, rising too. Sarcasm roughened the edge of her words. I do love surprises. They did not shake hands and she did not see him out. Hilda. Draco scheduled a visit with the Minister of Magic later that week. He sauntered past the minister's sour-faced assistant on the designated day, wondering who had pissed in her pixie puffs. Shacklebolt was as reticent with the details as Granger had been, but impressed upon Draco the importance of keeping Granger safe to complete her project, for the benefit of all Wizardkind. It was all very grand and extremely vague. The only positive was Shacklebolt's evident pleasure that it was Draco who had ended up with the assignment. I know you won't hesitate to get nasty, Malfoy, if any malicious individuals were to make a move against her. Draco accepted the backhanded compliment with a mock bow. You're warming the cockles of my heart, Minister. Shacklebolt returned the bow with an inclination of his head. Then he grew somber. She could change the lives of hundreds, thousands, for the better. And yet, neither she nor you will tell me what the project entails. Did she make you take a bloody vow of secrecy before she disclosed anything? Shacklebolt raised his hands, not responding one way or another, and thus gave Draco his answer. She would have the foresight, said Draco, throwing a fistful of flue powder into Shacklebolt's fireplace. Cambridge. This was it. He'd given her long enough to prepare. Hilda. It was late on Monday evening. King's Hall was quiet. Draco supposed that Granger was off having dinner or browbeating innocent undergraduates. He stood at the door of her laboratory, tapping his wand to his chin thoughtfully. However, before he had cast any kind of revelation charm or begun any sort of snooping, Granger rounded the corner. Malfoy, she said, looking a little disheveled and out of breath. Draco filed her timely arrival away for future analysis. She was too clever for it to be coincidence, and yet, he hadn't cast a single spell that would have made his presence known. Granger had forsaken her muggle clothing for green healer robes. She looked both irritable and impatient, and quickly confirmed both of those conditions by asking, "Time for your vaunted test, is it? How long will it take?" Draco did not appreciate her tone, which suggested that this might be an affair of several hours. "That depends on your warding, I'm thinking a quarter of an hour at the upper end." Granger's eyebrow rose at the cockiness of this rejoinder. "Good. Just did a shift at A&E and I'm positively knackered." She waved her wand and, with a rather impressive display of transfiguration, not that Draco gave any sign that he was impressed, she transformed one of her hairpins into a glossy wooden chair, upon which she perched herself to observe him. Draco didn't mind an audience, especially when he was going to systematically dismantle the audience's attempts to keep him out, and teach her some humility. Draco turned his attention back to the door. "A&E? I thought you were a researcher." "The MNHS is chronically understaffed. I take shifts at St. Mungo's to help out. Keeps my healing skills sharp." "Good of you." After a few revelation spells, Draco had to hand it to Granger, she'd done her homework. Not a surprise, really. The protective enchantments that now warded the door to her laboratory were many, quite complex, and well cast. Draco got to work, but not without taking the piss just a little. "Caterwauling charm? Insulting." "I've learned to work from the lowest common denominator up," was the dry response. The basic intruder charms that followed were dismissed with a few wand waves. The Salviohexia was a good warm-up. Then Draco got into the good stuff: Foribus Ignis, Custos Porte, a hair-trigger confundus aimed directly at his head, revealed only when he'd peeled away the other two wards, a sneaky blinding hex that just seemed mean, a balding jinx that was decidedly unsportsmanlike, and a concealed confringo on the door handle itself for anyone stupid enough to touch it. Draco disarmed the latter, a little touch and go, admittedly, and he did break a sweat, telling himself that at least if his face was blown off, there was a healer nearby who would be able to assist. The door unlocked. It had taken all of 4 minutes. And yet, Granger looked unimpressed. Draco swung open the door to reveal a stone wall. "Funny," said Draco. His face showed none of his disquiet, but he'd been wasting his time on an absolutely impeccable decoy. He waved his wand a meter further down the wall and the real door to the laboratory appeared. Granger shrugged. "I needed my staff able to get in. They aren't experts at disarming wards, but they can handle a finite incantatum." Draco entered the laboratory to continue his assessment, his neck rather stiff. His audience waved her chair back into a hairpin and followed. "Normally I would insist upon us donning the proper PPE, per Trinity's wet laboratory protocols," said Granger. "But we've tidied for the day. I don't think you can hurt yourself on anything." Once again, Draco didn't care for her tone, which, this time, suggested that he might otherwise off himself by accident. He ignored the sterile white and steel surfaces that made up most of the space and moved to the shelves and cupboards at one end of the laboratory, which looked like a likely place for an active laboratory to store data. However, the well-organized contents were useless. It was mostly Muggle scientific literature, including some of Granger's own publications. Words jumped out at Draco without meaning: cytokines, monoclonal antibodies, chimeric antigen receptors, T cells. "I realize the purpose of this test is to see how far you'd get and what you can discover about my research, but do put things back in an orderly fashion," came Granger's voice, irritation lacing her words. Draco, his back to her, permitted himself a healthy roll of his eyes. One text was half an inch out of place. He pushed it back in. He waved his wand at the entirety of the collection to uncover transfigurations or concealment spells, but there were none. Then he systematically did the same with the rest of the laboratory, seeking any hidey holes or caches or, as he grew annoyed, any magical trace whatsoever. There was nothing magical except the contents of the various vials and test tubes clustered in tidy groups along the laboratory's workbenches. If I stole these and had them analyzed, what would I discover? Asked Draco. The glow of his spell illuminated the vials of interest. Granger walked towards them and pointed. Gamma delta T cells. Antigens, MART1, tyrosinase, GP100, survivin. All of magical provenance, which is why your spell is revealing them, but not otherwise noteworthy. I see, said Draco, who did not see at all. I don't know who your hypothetical analysis would be conducted by, in the event that these were to be stolen to uncover what I'm working on, but I should tell you that very few people in the UK would be able to pull meaningful conclusions out of this. Draco felt the false modesty in the words. By very few, she meant none at all. I'm surrounded by idiots and I'm the only one who can make sense of any of these horrifically named extracts. And those? Asked Draco, pointing to larger, rather more familiar-looking vials along the back row. Your hypothetical analysts would discover perfectly brewed sanitatum, said Granger. That's a healing potion, she added, quite unnecessarily. A find of critical importance, in the laboratory of a healer, said Draco, his annoyance lapsing into sarcasm. There was the tiniest quirk at the corner of Granger's mouth, amusement, rapidly stifled. Draco was doing his own stifling, but in his case, it was exasperation. She had wasted his time on a wild goose chase with those door wards, knowing that there was nothing of real use in the laboratory itself, unless one was in possession of about 12 doctorates to put it all together. But she had to be recording findings, she was too methodological and meticulous not to. Now Draco turned to a corner of the laboratory that he'd ignored as a matter of course. It was the most muggleish area of the entire place, a corner desk cluttered with glowing boxes of light. Granger might as well have cast a notice me not on the lot. Had she? No, his detection spells showed nothing. That had been a feature of his own built-in habits. His eyes almost naturally averted themselves from the unmagical, the utterly mundane, the terribly muggle. He'd have to watch that, clearly, a weakness. He walked towards the desk. And, for the first time since Draco had entered the laboratory, Granger actually perked up and looked interested in the proceedings. Now he was getting somewhere. Computers, said Draco, pulling up some distant memory from Muggle studies. Well done, said Granger, with the tone one would take to praise an especially slow child who had correctly identified a barn animal. Draco favored her with a dark look. Her face was impassive, but her eyes betrayed her. She was curious about what he was going to do next. And, of course, he hadn't the faintest sodding clue where to go from here, other than jinxing the computers into submission, but from what he recalled, these devices weren't sentient. He stood before the glowing boxes, upon which slow lines were moving in random patterns. I'd need to bring in a Muggle-born, said Draco at length. Oh, yes, that would be a start, said Granger. She looked at her nails. You'd want to find one who is a decent hacker, too. I'm not sure many of those exist amongst Wizardkind, but perhaps one or two in the UK. A hacker? Yes, said Granger, offering no further explanation of the violent term. If, as I suspect, your findings are in these things, what's to stop me, a baddie, from destroying the lot, and stopping your research in its tracks? Asked Draco. Granger shrugged. It wouldn't matter. It's all in the cloud. The cloud? Yes. I'd be out the cost of the equipment, that's all. So your bog-standard dark wizard, up to no good, wouldn't have much to discover here. I'm afraid not, said Granger. The wards at the door were an amusing puzzle. Thank you for wasting my time. I wanted to see if you're as good as they say. Draco gave her a quick look, wanting to know who they was, because he did like to hear how good he was. Granger did not indulge him. I had a few other ideas for other hexes and things, she said, gesturing to the door, but I hadn't the time. So, no evidence of concealment, no written findings, computers, clouds. Draco looked at Granger. If I'm a baddie who needs information, what do I do next? Granger looked at him inquiringly. What do you do? I go after you, said Draco. He raised his wand and, a split second later, his spell hit her in the chest. Chapter 2, Draco Malfoy, genius inventor. He lumos dissipated harmlessly into Granger's robes, but her shock was nevertheless evident. That was unnecessary, she gasped, a hand at her breast. Draco made his way towards Granger's office with a bit of a saunter. I promise you other spells wouldn't be so friendly. No one's going to be casting unfriendly spells at me for no reason, said Granger, following him. They don't have a reason now, but if your big breakthrough is as significant as Shacklebolt thinks, and if, when, it gets out, then. He turned to her again, his wand raised. She was readier this time and spat out a protego. Better, said Draco. How's your resistance to the Imperious Curse? Granger grew still, her hand gripping her wand. If you cast that on me in my own laboratory, I shall drown you in sanitatum and enjoy the irony. Draco glanced above him. Every vial of sanitatum had levitated off the benches and was hovering over his head. In a real situation, he'd vanish the lot and blast Granger through 2 walls for the cheek. But, nevertheless, it was an impressive bit of nonverbal magic. I'll concede that your research is more or less safe, physically, from most wizarding intruders, said Draco. The vials settled back into place. But it all lives in your head and can therefore be read, or tortured, out of you, or any of your staff. I'm the PI on the project in question. My staff consists of 5 undergraduates and 8 graduate students whose combined understanding of the project is probably 15%, scattered through 13 minds. They aren't much of a vulnerability. Draco gave her a hard look. Then you're the vulnerability. She, predictably, looked offended. How's your occlumency? Asked Draco. The question was accompanied, of course, by a friendly bit of legilimency. Draco was granted a clear view of Granger's perception of him at that precise moment, tall, arrogant ponce with good hair, and then he was mentally slapped out of her mind. He pressed a finger to the center of his forehead, this which was making his brain sting. Meanwhile, Granger looked like she wished to double down and slap him in the material world for good measure, and wouldn't that just be a lovely throwback to their school days? I thought we were assessing my laboratory, not me, said Granger, her eyes flashing at him. We are assessing risk exposures, said Draco. And it's quickly becoming obvious that you're a significant one. Is your home warded? Moderately. I can enhance it. I'll enhance it, said Draco. How do you travel? Flu, apparition. Those are trackable, you know. Broom? I detest flying, said Granger. Draco made a valiant effort not to curl his lip. What a terrible position to take. What a dreadful thing to hate. What a sad circumvention of one of the greatest joys of being magical. Granger fell in his esteem quite irredeemably. Since when is apparition trackable, other than the trace? Asked Granger. Top secret, said Draco, now in Granger's office. He riffled through the various stacks of paperwork and books, encountering, again, nothing but that highly specialized, utterly incomprehensible Muggle jargon, and no sign of recent developments, note-taking, record-keeping, or anything of a useful nature that might point him to Granger's precious findings. There was another computer in the office, which Draco eyed with a resigned kind of vexation. How stupid to be flummoxed by a device that any Muggle off the street could probably operate. Perhaps he should have kidnapped the porter at the gate and brought him in to assist, statute of secrecy notwithstanding. He stared at the computer intimidatingly, waiting for it to confess its sins, but it merely offered him wobbly lines. Draco snooped, scanned and searched for interesting magical giveaways in the rest of the office. Granger pulled off her healer robes and dropped into the chair that Draco had occupied upon his first visit. She let out a sigh of unadulterated fatigue. Draco glanced at her. Muggle clothing again, underneath. This time a long-sleeved top and some trousers that barely merited the name, more like opaque black tights, really. Was this decent public attire by Muggle standards? Shocking. He could see the precise outline of her calf and the exact shape of her knee. He didn't spend too long musing upon the foibles of Muggle fashion, however, as the witch herself was a bit of a concern. He could see now how thin she was, how her collarbones shadowed, how her neck seemed too dainty to hold the mass of hair pinned upon her head. She was pale, peaky, and generally looked overdrawn. "What's your schedule like, Granger?" Draco asked, as though continuing his querying about her travel patterns, but really wanting to get a sense of what exactly this woman did with herself, day in and day out. Typically, Granger had a schedule ready, color-coded and planned to the hour. She waved her wand in the direction of her desk and the schedule floated to Draco and deposited itself into his hands. Using his wand as a makeshift quill, Draco drew circles around her moments of exposure, when she'd move between places and be most vulnerable to attack. And there were many. Granger was everywhere and did everything. She had dedicated laboratory hours, clinic hours, teaching hours, volunteering for a horrid amount of good causes, tutoring sessions, mentoring sessions, healing at St. Mungo's and what sounded like a local Muggle surgery, one, pub night every fortnight with Potter and friends, college dinners, something called yoga at unholy hours in the morning, something called Crook's Vet that recurred every 3 months, and then occasional days, here and there, marked only with an asterisk. "What are these?" asked Draco, pointing at one of the blocks with an asterisk. "Holidays," said Granger. "Your occlumency might be passable, but your lying isn't. They're days off." Granger grew snippy. "And I shan't be divulging more details of my personal life than I already have, thank you." Draco dropped the subject, and the schedule, back onto her desk. Overdrawn wasn't even the right word for Granger, exhausted, or depleted, maybe. Draco recalled some vague rumor that young Granger had been granted a time turner during their Hogwarts years, to squeeze more classes into her school days. Potter and Weasley had quickly dismissed that bit of lunch hour chatter. Looking at the overzealous, overachieving, overtired witch before him, Draco found himself rather inclined to believe the tale. He continued his search, though he doubted there would be much else to find. The wall at the rear of the office was covered in frames of various sizes, certificates, diplomas, awards. "Nice mosaic," said Draco. Granger gave him a look. Well, he found himself funny, even if Granger didn't. The mosaic informed Draco that Granger didn't quite have 12 doctorates, but her combination of Muggle and magical diplomas probably approached that number. Again, the Muggle ones were a mystery, awarded by Muggle universities he hadn't heard of: bachelors in biomedical sciences, masters in microbiology and immunology, joint MD-PhD in oncology, some minor certificate in genetics. He recognized the healer's seal, at least, Cambridge, specializing in magical diseases. Her other magical certifications were a master's in transfiguration, Edinburgh, an earlier degree, just after the war, probably, and a specialized study in healing, blood magics, from the Sorbonne. A smattering of other certificates and qualifications completed Granger's educational oeuvre. A box on a low shelf revealed a few dusty older frames. The things he knew her for in her brilliant Hogwarts days, the record-breaking OWLS, the absurd amount of NEWTS, didn't merit a place upon her wall of adult achievements. He spotted an Order of Merlin, first class. Potter had similar, proudly hung upon his cubicle wall, but Granger hadn't the room, apparently. Granger excused herself to make tea, and, in a show of civility that appeared moderately challenging to verbalize, asked if he'd like a cup. Draco said no. Granger looked relieved. After she'd left, Draco, being a pragmatic and sneakish kind of person, took advantage of the moment to cast a few discreet tracking spells upon a handful of her personal items. The trainers under the desk, hairpins, the blarm things were everywhere, a half-finished mug of tea. He rifled through the paperwork on her desk and found nothing of interest: conference invitations, Muggle grant application results, notes from students. Useless tat. The computer made a sound like a small ping. Draco turned to it. Its dark surface and wiggling lines challenged him to touch it and die of electric shocks. Then Draco gasped and said, "Hang on." "What?" asked Granger, who had just re-entered the room. "This whole place is so Muggleish that I hadn't even thought to ask, but, how are these computers working? We're in a magical building." "Oh, that," said Granger. She made what Draco presumed was meant to be a casual shrug. It wasn't very casual. "I found ways to circumvent the issue." "How?" "Ways," said Granger. "What ways?" asked Draco. She stared at him as though assessing his worthiness for this knowledge. In the face of her open eye contact, Draco was sorely tempted to attempt legilimency again. Just as the thought passed his mind, her eyes lost some of their sparkle. She was occluding. "I found a solution," said Granger with another vague gesture. "I couldn't possibly work with only quills and parchment, that's positively archaic. Not to mention the hundreds of thousands of calculations and projections I've needed to do. Anyway, you needn't preoccupy yourself with it. I can assure you that it's nothing dangerous." Draco stepped closer to the computer, observing the various gadgets connected to its periphery by long smooth fibers. Only a few things weren't connected to the principal organ, as he named the glowing box part, including 3 smallish metallic pucks set around the thing. Rather how one might set up a perimeter, really. To keep things in or out. He strode to the collection of computers in the laboratory proper, Granger following with a kind of polite curiosity. There, too, were the metallic pucks. 6 of them, this time, creating a jagged circle. "I'd be careful handling those," said Granger. Draco, whose hand had been hovering above one of the pucks, pulled back. "It's not dangerous, but you won't like the feeling." She came beside him and held one up. "I'm calling it an anti-magical force field, for lack of a better term. Rather challenging to create, but it serves my purposes." Draco stared at her. Blocking magic was a tricky bit of work, a thing mostly relegated to abstruse theoretical discussions. The handful of magic-inhibiting artifacts he'd heard of were things of distant legend, lost to the passage of time. And yet, "I got the idea from Wi-Fi hotspots in cafes and airports, only, of course, this is the contrary," said Granger. Then, seeing from his face that explained nothing, she said, "Never mind." "I'm not entirely certain that those are legal," said Draco, looking at the pucks. "Better report me to Shacklebolt," said Granger. Her eyes met his, unfriendly, unafraid. Draco decided that Granger had balls, possibly rivaling Tonk's enormous pair. The beginnings of a plan were germinating in his head. "I need a copy of your schedule," he said, leading the way back to Granger's office. A quick duplicate assorted that, paired with a protean charm to ensure that changes to her version would be reflected on his. "Right. I shall prepare a tidy little report with some recommendations to ensure Healer Granger's continued safety and well-being," said Draco, scribbling out a few notes. "I'm also going to see what I can do to reassure Shacklebolt that you're not going to be murdered tomorrow, and that I needn't be your minder on a daily basis." "A relief for all parties," said Granger. "Watch for my owl in a few days. Also, please stop giving him treacle tart, it makes him unruly." "Understood," said Granger, looking only slightly abashed. "Is the test over, then?" "Yes." "Finally," said Granger. Then, because she was a normal, well-adjusted individual, she sat down at her desk to work some more. Draco saw that he had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist, and decided to show himself out without further ceremony. "Mind the tile just in front of the door, quicksand curse," said Granger absently. "It was to catch the baddies on the way out." "Saw it, Granger." "Of course you did." "Hilda." A few exchanges with Shacklebolt ensued, during which Draco outlined his plan and convinced the minister that it was the correct approach, and that, moreover, no other approach would do because the principal would be too uncooperative. Draco studied Granger's schedule in quiet moments, puzzling over the asterisk holidays. His first thought was that the days were a personal indicator of some private thing. They were too scattered to be a reminder for her period. The pattern wasn't lunar, either. Good to know Granger wasn't a secret werewolf. Dates for some romantic entanglement, perhaps? Was that why she hadn't marked down details? Was he looking at Granger's sex schedule? Would she really take entire days off? Draco felt that he ought to shake the hand of the man responsible. He also surreptitiously checked the off-day requests book at the Auror office, and neither the Weasels nor Pothead's upcoming holidays coincided. The mystery endured. Draco spent a few days tinkering with the key element of his plan. And by tinkering, we do mean, of course, mucking about with ancient magic's best left untouched. "Hilda." "Recommendations," said Draco, slapping a roll of parchment onto Granger's desk. "Fairly standard stuff for fairly obvious vulnerabilities. I've run them past Shacklebolt. He's agreed to withdraw the protection request if you comply with them." Granger unrolled the parchment and found that it reached the floor. She gave him a slow blink. "Anything you'd like to draw my particular attention to, in the interest of saving time?" "Yes," said Draco. "Item 56. Granger ran down the list to the line in question. "The principal must agree to wear the ring at all times, until completion of the project." "That's the one," said Draco. "What ring?" asked Granger. "This one," said Draco, tossing a ring towards her. The small silver band landed on the parchment, spun once, and was still. I don't care to train you on Imperius and Veritaserum resistance, or personal protection magics, or advanced occlumency, or drill you on physical self-defense, gods forbid. You look like your punches might concuss a gnat, at best, and nor, I think, do you want to endure these things. Correct, said Granger, her suspicious look moving from the ring to Draco. Nor do I want to stand sentry at your door like some glorified bodyguard, waiting for whatever Shacklebolt expects to happen. Yes, said Granger with enthusiasm. Continue. So I presented Shacklebolt with this option, which will allow me to, in essence, be alerted if anything were to happen to you, and apparate to you instantly. I can find better uses for my time, and you can carry on with your, distressingly full, by the way, schedule, unimpeded. Draco waited to be praised for the simple elegance of this brilliant solution. Instead, Granger poked the ring with her wand. It isn't going to kill you, said Draco. Granger met his eyes seriously. My dataset is, admittedly, rather small, but I saw the aftermath of the last piece of jewelry that Draco Malfoy handed out, and it was alarming. You'll have to forgive me if I don't immediately put this on. I'd like to analyze it. Ah, yes. The Katie Bell incident. If Draco had any feelings, they would have been a little hurt, probably, by this display of mistrust stemming from the actions of an idiot boy being manipulated by the darkest wizard of the century, a decade and a half ago. But he didn't, so the point was moot. I'm happy to see that you've got some self-preservation instincts, said Draco. He swept his hand towards the ring. Analyze away. Granger cast a few revelation spells, which set the ring aglow with slow rotating, translucent spellwork. So, what's all this? Telling you would rather spoil the fun, wouldn't it? You tell me, said Draco. And with that, he settled back into his chair into a relaxed pose. Now it was his turn to watch her unpuzzle a thing. She flicked through the spells with some adeptness, quickly picking out the more critical ones. Draco supposed that diagnostic magic would come easily to her as a healer. She listed her findings. A locator charm, miscellaneous protective runes, thoughtful, thank you, a distress beacon, heart rate monitoring. Now her lips quirked. What's funny? Asked Draco. You've invented a wizarding fit, bit. I beg your pardon? Unless he was misunderstanding, Granger was suggesting that his exceptional creation was a knockoff of a muggle thing? What? Never mind. What's this unfinished mess here? Asked Granger, holding her wand point to a ghostly green knot of arithmetic calculations. Draco felt his nostrils pinch. That unfinished mess was the result of many frustrating hours of work. I haven't got round to finishing that yet. What was it meant to be? Portkey. For moments when you couldn't apparate, or if you were trapped in an anti-apparition ward. I haven't worked out the calculations. Granger looked mildly impressed. Draco supposed that she was surrounded by the nation's greatest magical brains on the daily, and that he ought to be pleased that she was mildly impressed by a mere aura's paltry creation. An on-demand portkey would be something, said Granger. Portus is a pain in the arse of an enchantment, said Draco, trying to sound resigned, rather than sullen. Have you ever thought of making more of these rings? You could monetize these easily, said Granger, holding the ring aloft. Do I look like I need money? Asked Draco. Granger leveled a stare at him. Her back straightened. They had been dangerously close to lapsing into a civil conversation and she seemed to have forgotten who she was talking to. She sniffed in lieu of responding. Anyway, I can't mass-produce the ring. Right. Granger was weighing the ring in the palm of her hand. Because this isn't just some trinket you put a few neat charms on. No. This is an artifact. Indeed. A family heirloom, if I were to hazard a guess. Yes. Of course she'd spotted the concealment charm that made the ring look like a plain silver band. Now she tapped her wand to reveal the ring's true appearance, an ornate silver Ouroboros, ever eating its own tail. And on the inside, the family motto, Sanctimonia Vincit Semper. Purity will always conquer. You're certain this ring won't immediately attempt to amputate my finger? I'm not pure, after all, said Granger. Draco felt that the temperature in Granger's office had dropped rather suddenly. Did you see a sign of dark magic? Asked Draco. Too quickly, he'd sounded defensive. Blast. If there was dark magic, it's gone now, said Granger. She tapped the ring again, reverting it back to the plain silver band. She looked thoughtful. I'll need some time to go through this extremely comprehensive list of recommendations, she said at length. Take the time you need, said Draco. But know that the alternative is Shacklebolt setting up a camp bed for me, for overnights in your laboratory. She eyed him, then seemed to decide that he must be joking. I'll need to think about item 56 in particular. Do you want the ring back in the meantime? Keep it, said Draco. Have your friends analyze it, isn't one of the Weasley brothers meant to be good at that stuff? And when you've quite settled any doubts, owl me, and we can get on with our lives. Granger perked up, as though getting on with her life without a Draco-shaped barnacle attached to her was the kindest hope he could have offered her. I will, she said. Two of her students, kitted up in their strange white cloaks and goggles, knocked at the door, excited to share some new development with dear Professor Granger. Draco rose to leave as Granger donned her own white coat to join the students in the laboratory. There was an awkward, conflicted look on her face. Draco, never one to make things easy, merely raised an eyebrow at her. I suppose I want to say thank you for working through this as you are. I haven't exactly been pulling my weight trying to find a solution to Shacklebolt's request. The ring is a good idea. I think you're more than pulling your weight elsewhere, said Draco. He left. She muttered something that might have been a goodbye. Chapter 3, House Call by Genius Inventor. Chapter text. Draco's eagle owl was given a decent workout in the coming days as Draco and Granger negotiated back and forth on a few of the recommendations that he'd made. She suggested that some of the measures were positively draconian, pun intended, do forgive me, and tried to push back on them, with an especial focus on the home visit for personalized warding. Eventually, Draco pulled out his most severe quill, and composed the following. Granger, Shacklebolt's orders on the warding of the Granger domicile aren't up for negotiation. Do let me know when would be convenient to come by this week for the warding. If you don't, I shall drop by at an inconvenient time by default. D. For Draconian. Malfoy, unsure if you heard my sigh of exasperation from London, so I am recording its occurrence here for your information. I am more than capable of improving the warding on my own property, or of hiring a warding firm. But, if Shacklebolt is insisting on your particular expertise, so be it. See my schedule for options. I have just updated it. NB, they are very few. Tuesday evening looks the most promising, but I will be the doctor, Muggle healer, on call at the local surgery and may have to leave in the middle. H. Granger, I know what a doctor is. D. Hilda. So, what did the home of a nationally famous scholar, war heroine, healer, champion of just causes, researcher in danger look like? A modest sort of cottage in Cambridgeshire, as it happened. 3 bedrooms, at Draco's best guess. Granger stood at the gate. As he approached from his apparition point, she waved her wand to allow him to pass whatever preliminary ward she had set up. What's wrong with your face? She asked as Draco neared the gate. Always to the point, was Granger. Bludger, said Draco. Oh. It looks bad. It probably did, too. Zabini had a mean swing. As he neared the gate, Draco saw Granger scrutinizing the injury with a well-practiced eye. She vacillated for a moment, then, apparently unable to resist do-gooding, blurted out, "Do you want me to have a look at it?" "No. I've already put a salve on," said Draco, brushing his fingers against his slowly bruising jaw. "That's going to make a lovely hematoma. I'm fine. I came here to ward your house, not for a consult." Granger's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Are you going to invite me in?" asked Draco, irked by her standing there, watching him with something like concern. Now he felt like some kind of vampire angling for an invitation over the threshold. "Come in, then," said Granger, a little snappish, pulling the gate open. Draco saw that she was dressed in another version of the white coat, this time accessorized with a dangling contraption wrapped around her neck. "You've left your auto-asphyxiation device on," said Draco, pointing to it. "It's a stethoscope," said Granger, with an unspoken, "you cretin," attached to the end of the sentence. "Right," said Draco, not deigning to request clarification. "Give us a tour and let's crack on." She brought him through to the cottage's front room, which might have been a living room, except that it was an explosion of books. "You scolded me for placing a book half an inch out of place. Look at this disaster," said Draco, piqued by the injustice. "It's my digitizing project," said Granger. "It's a temporary disaster." She gestured to a Muggle machine in the center of it all, connected to a flattish version of a computer. Digitizing? Yes. Preserving magical knowledge through Muggle means, as I'm growing tired of lugging enormous books about, of finding irreparably damaged or lost material because some idiot spilled tea on a page 20 years ago, and of having to search for things through ancient record cards like it's 1855. It's a pet project for my rarest volumes. Unfortunately, I haven't as much time to dedicate to it as I'd like. She brought Draco through to the kitchen, a rather Muggle space, save for the variety of magical plants explosively taking over her window ledges and various potions aglow here and there. There might have been something magical slowly brewing in a cauldron at the hearth, but she swept him past it. Conservatory? Asked Draco as they moved to the next room. Granger looked at him as though he had just confirmed what a posh twat he was. A conservatory? This is an Ascot house. The letting agent called it a sun room. That seemed an optimistic appellation to Draco, who watched January sleet begin to drizzle against the glass ceiling with skepticism. Then an odd, orange, squash-faced creature appeared, and wound its way around Granger's ankles. In another moment of wild optimism, Granger referred to it as a cat. "What's wrong with your cat?" asked Draco, bending over to regard the creature with concern. "Nothing's wrong with him," said Granger. Both she and the creature looked at Draco with great offense. "He's part Kneazle, and very intelligent. Aren't you, my darling? My sweetums? My angel boy?" As its ears were massaged by Granger, the cat regarded Draco with an expression of utmost disdain. Then it decided that it had had enough of Granger's attention and turned to leave, its absurd tail held high, so that Draco got a full view of its bumhole. "Charming," said Draco. The tour continued to the cramped upstairs space. 3 small bedrooms, as Draco had guessed, with predictable points of entry that he would have to ward. The first bedroom appeared to be used as a study. Draco noted a kind of plinth in the middle of the space. On it rested a grimoire, very old and damaged, surrounded by the glow of stasis charms. Granger saw what had caught his attention. "A tragedy. Don't ask me about it or I shall cry." Draco did not wish to deal with bookish sniveling and did not pursue the subject, but he made a mental note of the object, for future prying. The second bedroom was quite bare, save for a long mat on the floor, candles, and a cluster of orchids. What ritual was Granger preparing to cast here? He tried to make sense of the candle arrangement, but it didn't match the geometry of anything he recognized. Finally, they came to Granger's bedroom, which she permitted him a glance into with evident unease. Draco couldn't find a civil way to say, "Stop bloody fidgeting, I only need to see how the baddies might try to kidnap you. I'm not here to rifle through your knickers," so he said nothing. An obnoxious jingle began to play somewhere in Granger's vicinity. She pulled a palm-sized Muggle thingy out of her pocket and spoke into it. From what Draco understood, she was being summoned to the surgery by the means of this device. She confirmed this by rushing past Draco to the stairs. "I have to go. I think you've seen enough to orient yourself. Please set the wards to let Crookshanks in and out. He likes to roam. I'll be back in a few hours." "Crookshanks?" called Draco as Granger tripped down the stairs. "The cat," said Granger. She disappeared outside, but instead of the crack of disapparition, Draco heard the sound of a motor. Granger was driving. A Muggle car. The absolute weirdo. Or perhaps not, he thought upon reflection, as he made his way back to the garden. If she was going to a Muggle surgery, she'd have to show up by Muggle means. An instantaneous apparition at the door would raise questions. As he pondered the overfilled dual life that Granger led, Draco began to ward. "Hilda." After about 2 hours of work, Draco pronounced himself satisfied. The wards would need to be recast every week or so, but no one would be able to waltz in sans Granger's permission. Points of entry and egress were all reinforced with the Auror's standard kit and a few of Draco's own inventions. Underground approaches would be flummoxed by a robust Appellans Penetrationem and aerial attacks would be rebuffed by a Kylie Praesidium. The usual assortment of intruder alarms was scattered about. Frankly, for a witch of Granger's relative fame, whose 2 closest chums were now Aurors, her protection measures had been paltry. But then, it was peacetime, and she was a scholar, now, not a child chasing dark objects to murder an evil wizard 7 times over. The half-Kneazle stared balefully at Draco through the sleet from the shelter of the stoop. Draco added the creature's magical signature to the wards and told him so. The creature blinked at him. Draco was unnerved. Just as the rain began to lessen, a car made its way up the drive and behind the cottage. Granger rounded the corner a moment later. "Still here, are you?" "I've just finished," panted Draco. Warding was a magically exhausting task. The half-Kneasel was given a great many kisses on his ugly head as Draco stood by and tried not to look wet and sweaty. "And where was his 'thank you,' if you please?" "I shall have to ward your car," said Draco. "If you use it to get around a lot. And the Muggle surgery, if you're there regularly." Granger frowned at him. "My car is brand new. You can't ward it, you'll muck something up." In the face of Draco's confused defense, she added, "Cars have electrical components in them, now. Maybe they didn't when you were in Muggle studies." This was said as though Draco was approximately 120 years old and had last taken Muggle studies when cars were called horseless carriages. "I'll bung a sneakoscope into the glove box," said Granger. For someone so clever, she certainly was an idiot. "Excellent," said Draco. "That'll definitely ward off a Bombarda Maxima from 20 meters out. I'll be able to tell Shacklebolt that we'd taken all necessary measures to protect you, when we pull your charred remains out of the wreckage." The violent imagery was successful. Granger gave in. "Fine. You can ward it. But do try to stay away from the center bits, with all the buttons. Next to the steering wheel." Draco's moment of triumph was ruined by a long and echoing hungry growl, unmistakably from his stomach. Unfortunate, he was prepared to blame the cat. There was a pause. Granger's eyes flitted to Draco's midriff. She appeared to be struggling between her natural feelings for him and her manners. Then, finally, "You must be famished. Do you want to come in? I've a few snacks. We can go over the recommendations, and the ring." Why yes, Draco was starving. 2 hours of warding really did take it out of a man. However, there was a 5-course meal waiting for him at the manor. However, he wanted to wrap up this affair and have his next communication with Granger be regarding the return of the ring, however many months hence. "All right," said Draco. Draco popped into the loo to refresh himself, which mainly involved scourgifying his armpits, the height of class, mother would be proud, and attempting some drying charms on his robes. His hair he deemed a lost cause tonight. Not that he had anyone to impress here. And besides, in this cottage, with Granger the human anemone and her orange toilet brush of a familiar, his hair still easily won best in show. His entire look was complemented by the magnificent bruise starting to develop along his jaw. He pressed more of the salve into it, annoyed that Granger had been right about how bad it was going to get. He trudged to the kitchen, where Granger had the scroll of recommendations and the ring set out upon the kitchen table. She removed her white coat and stuffed it into a Muggle machine at the end of the worktop, judging by the folded piles around it, a washing apparatus. Another long-sleeved top underneath, who knew that Granger had such an aversion to exposing her elbows. The kitchen table was pushed into a corner. Draco therefore took a chair next to Granger. From this vantage, far closer than he'd been to her at any point previously, he noted that she was in possession of a decent pair of tits. However, Granger chose that moment to unravel the scroll, now liberally scribbled with question marks and counter-suggestions, and Draco was unable to feel attracted because he was being suffocated by waves of swat. "Some of my principal concerns," said Granger, nodding her chin towards the parchment, which promised a long and arduous evening of argument. "But first, let's eat something." She rummaged about in a pathetically empty cupboard and popped some options onto the table. As far as Draco was concerned, the principal article of diet was cat hair. He pulled a few orangey strands from his mouth as the cat, damn the creature, wound its way around his chair's legs, looking smugly at him. Granger did him the courtesy of looking abashed when she noticed. "Sorry." She waved her wand in Draco's direction, vanishing most of the fur. "It does get everywhere. Sometimes I think he can actually will it into existence, into unspeakable places." Draco, pulling at a hair, said PTHT in response, but what he really wanted to say was, "If I find orange fur on my balls tonight, I shall skin that animal with my bare hands." Granger tore open a package of something and passed it to him. "What is this?" asked Draco, holding up one of the things. "Cheesy whatsits." Which explained everything, obviously. For her part, Granger ate tuna, directly from the tin. "Grim, Granger," said Draco. "It's protein," said Granger. She looked at the mediocre spread that Draco was scowling at and got a bit defensive. "I haven't had time to go to the shops." "Why don't you send a house elf?" As the words came out of his mouth, Draco cut himself off, but it was too late. Granger was looking at him like he'd just confirmed, for the second time that evening, what an overprivileged wanker he was. She rose, tight-jawed, to make tea. It seemed an excuse to get away from his immediate vicinity. But, whatever, Draco wasn't here to make friends. Granger banged about with the kettle. She looked like she was holding back a certain quantity of Draco-oriented vitriol. He surreptitiously checked his pockets. He did have a bezoar on him, in case his tea had any special additives courtesy of the house elf vigilante. Granger set their mugs on the table with rather more firmness than was necessary. There was no immediate evidence of poison. She had found a packet of biscuits to go with the tea. Draco ate 2/3 of it like a famished thing, and if they were poisoned, then so be it. Then Granger straightened out the parchment, seemed to, with an effort, compartmentalize her feelings about Draco the wanker, and became all business. She queried him on the recommendations as though he were an apprentice auror who had submitted this for review, and ought to be grateful for the feedback. And so they argued through the list. On item 14, whether he would add caretaking staff to the laboratory's wards, he conceded. On item 26, whether she really needed to give him notice when she was leaving town, yes, and if so, how much notice, 24 hours. On item 33, what constituted a public event, over 40 people. On item 34, why did she have to advise him of her attendance at Muggle ones? Because he said so. Could he not make her home unplottable? She had Muggle friends who might want to visit? No, and so on and so forth until they came to item 56. Granger refilled their tea and pulled out another packet of biscuits, given that Draco had stress-eaten the entirety of the first one. So, the ring, said Granger. The ring, repeated Draco. The crux of the thing, the object that meant he could continue his life in happy, Granger-less freedom and still satisfy the minister and Tonks. I've had it looked at by a few experts. It does seem quite safe. They were rather impressed by it, actually. Draco wanted to say, naturally, I'm a genius. Where is your Fitsit now? He sipped his tea self-righteously instead. I've also had a chat with Tonks, continued Granger. She probably told you how much she likes the idea, too. Means you'll be able to take on other assignments while monitoring me at a distance. So, all told, glowing reviews all around, with minimal cons, and I'm willing to proceed. I do have a question for you, however. Yes? Said Draco, even though he had a fair guess about the question. In fact, he was surprised she hadn't asked earlier. How does the information tracked by the ring come to you? Draco held up his hand and waved his wand at it, cancelling the notice me not charm there. Ah, said Granger, as the silver ring on Draco's finger came into view. Her gaze flicked from Draco's ring to the one on the table. Then, after some private deliberations in that overlarge brain of hers, she said, quite intelligently in Draco's opinion, I shan't ask more questions about the original use of these things. I feel that further details might put me off the whole affair. Good shout, said Draco. Because, yes, these ancient rings had long been worn by married couples in the Malfoy family. His mother had removed hers many years ago, following Lucius Malfoy's death in Azkaban. The ring's silence was a constant reminder of the loss and she could no longer bear to wear it. Draco had modified the ring so that there would only be one-way communication between Granger's and his. He certainly didn't need her being alerted every time his heart rate spiked when he was having a morning wank. Thanks. Living on in happy ignorance of these thoughts, Granger asked, is anything special required or do I just put it on? I'll do it, said Draco. It needs to be done by the person wearing the rings, mate. He tried to be gruff and businesslike about it, but there are very few things in the world as unbusinesslike as a man putting a ring on a woman's finger, and it was awkward despite his best attempts. He wondered if Granger found it as awkward as he did. She was studying the kitchen wallpaper, a tint of pink high on her cheeks. Her hand was small in his, and delicate. The ring went on effortlessly. He felt a kind of enlivening in the ring on his own hand. It had someone to talk to, now. The distress beacon is activated by twisting it 3 times around your finger, said Draco to break the silence. Do that and I'll apparate to you immediately. Granger snapped away from her fascination with the wallpaper. All right. Do reserve it for critical situations, Granger, not because you've found tea spilled on a book. I'm very much hoping I'll never have to use it at all. She looked at the ring glinting on her hand. At least the thing didn't immediately try to kill me. Don't get too comfortable. It could be playing a long game. Draco tapped the scroll they had discussed ad nauseum, integrating the scribbled results of their back and forth into a clean version. Then he created a duplicate for her. Now that we've finalized this, you must stick with it. We've established a duty of care, and I'd rather not be dragged in front of the Wizengamot for professional negligence resulting in the death of the great Hermione Granger. I understand, came the great Hermione Granger's serious reply. Good. Now, before I go, one last thing. Draco dug a hand into his pocket. My owl's lost half a pound of weight since we've been communicating, so I feed him more treacle tart, interjected Granger. Her cat was on her lap, finishing the tin of tuna. I've decided to give in to the trend and buy these things, finished Draco. He placed a pair of Weasley's jabbering jotters on the table. You've probably heard of them, all the rage amongst the younger generation. Owls aren't quite the thing anymore. Not immediate enough. In Draco's opinion, a sad end to a long wizarding tradition. One couldn't write a strongly worded letter on a jabbering jotter, one simply couldn't. I am familiar with those, said Granger. She was very obviously holding back a smile. Draco weighed the pros and cons of asking for the reason behind the smile. He decided against. Between her and the cat, the levels of smugness in the room would soon asphyxiate him. So you know how they work? Asked Draco, passing her the small magical notepad. Oh, yes, said Granger, accepting the object. Thank you. I feel bad about your owl. He'll recover and soon grow fat from lack of exercise. His job here done, Draco rose with a general mutter of thanks for the tea. Granger replied with some inaudible words of gratitude for the warding. The cat attempted to trip him and break his neck on his way out of the kitchen. Draco decided that was a suitable end to an unpleasant evening. Chapter 4, Imbolc. Chapter text. In his handful of years working with Potter and Weasley, Draco had developed a cool, professional kind of rapport with them, which Weasley demonstrated the next morning by calling, "Oi, dickhead," and hanging over Draco's cubicle wall like a disjointed ginger muppet. "What do you want, Weasel?" "We heard Hermione's been assigned Auror protection, and that the bloke's a tosser," said Weasley. "Was that her description, or yours?" Potter, whose disastrous hair and vivid green eyes now popped up over the cubicle wall, said, "Ours. She says you've been quite professional. We know the truth." "Lucky bugger," said Weasley. "How come Tonks gives us the vampires, and you the Hermione minding? You don't even like her." "I understand that it was a question of competence," said Draco. "Tonks said she needed to assign the finest Auror to protect the finest mind in the UK." Weasley scoffed, Potter laughed. "And the nuisance Aurors to deal with the nuisance vampires," finished Draco. "I said no such thing," said Tonks, waddling by in the form of a short, overweight man. "Shouldn't you all be off working, you blatherskites? You're all nuisance Aurors, as far as I'm concerned." Potter and Weasley chortled. Draco was offended. "What's Hermione working on, anyway, that's got old Shaq so worked up?" asked Weasley. "She won't tell us." "That information's on a need-to-know basis," said Draco, tapping his nose. He hadn't a clue either, but winding up the nuisance duo was always a good time. The two of them looked suitably annoyed that Draco seemed to know something they didn't. "Work," shouted Tonks from her office. "Yes, boss," replied Weasley. "Word to the wise, Malfoy," said Potter as they left. "Don't insult Hermione's cat." "Too late," said Draco. Hilda. 2 weeks passed, during which all was quiet on the Granger front. Her ring had been calibrated to alert Draco to extreme physiological or emotional shifts that might indicate immediate danger, significant spikes of fear, panic, pain, or an unusually high heart rate. In general, Granger seemed to be miraculously even-tempered. There was one day when Draco's ring tingled at him throughout the morning, signaling that Granger's pulse was elevated at various points, but not quite at the threshold signaling a wild panic. He set it out of his mind and joined Goggin and a few junior Aurors for a hand-to-hand combat session. Tonks insisted that her Aurors not only maintained their dueling expertise through rigorous practice, but also their abilities as physical fighters. Many had moaned about having to learn to fight like muggles. Tonks had set them straight. A disarmed Auror with hand-to-hand training could still outmaneuver, disarm, or maim an opponent, if he kept his wits about him. A wandless Auror without those things was a very dead Auror. Granger's elevated pulse, the fourth such incident that morning, interrupted Draco's spar. His momentary distraction earned him a solid uppercut from Goggin. He called for a pause, clutching at his jaw, and used the jotter to send Granger an annoyed message, consisting solely of punctuation. She responded with a brief note, losing a patient. Draco didn't respond, mostly because he didn't know what to say, but also because Goggin had decided that the break was over and was now attempting to concuss him. A while later he received the following missive from Granger: "By the way, going out of town tomorrow morning, just for the day. I know our agreement said 24 hours notice for departures and this is more like 12. Sorry, it's been hellish." "Where?" was Draco's response. "Somerset," was Granger's. "Why?" "Holiday." "One of those asterisk holidays?" Granger didn't respond. "So, yes." That evening, while Draco was at dinner, his ring signaled pain. But it wasn't physical pain. It was the heart pain of grief, from somewhere in Cambridgeshire. The poignancy of the feeling surprised him. The sincerity of it. Granger truly was a do-gooder to the core. He supposed that she had got home and was giving way to the loss of her patient. "Draco? Is everything all right?" Draco found himself being observed by the thoughtful blue eyes of Narcissa Malfoy. He realized he'd stopped eating when the ghostly grief had suffused his senses. "I'm fine," said Draco. "Just thinking about work." Draco hadn't told his mother that he'd requisitioned the Malfoy rings. He was certain that she wouldn't agree with his repurposing, nor with his choice of recipient. He cast about for a safe subject for discussion and remarked on the nicer-than-usual flower arrangement in the center of the table. Floristry was one of his mother's hobbies. "Do you like it?" asked his mother, leaning over to touch a few delicate petals. She seemed in a pensive mood. "It's Imbolc tomorrow." Imbolc? The word was vaguely familiar to Draco, some pagan festival or other. Narcissa pulled up an already perfectly placed blossom and replaced it even more perfectly in the bouquet. "Yes, it marks the end of winter. Your grandmother used to observe those old traditions when I was a little girl. The house would be decorated with snowdrops and daffodils on every surface, we'd have a feast, and we'd feel hopeful, knowing that spring was finally on its way." Draco made some polite reply. His mother watched him eat, her own hands folded onto her lap. She had something else to say. "What is it?" asked Draco. "Are you going to be home tomorrow? I've got some friends coming for tea." Draco made a few quick calculations. Those few friends would most certainly happen to have lovely and accomplished daughters, who would no doubt come too. His mother had grown rather less subtle about her matchmaking since he'd turned 30. Unfortunately for Narcissa, and the eligible young ladies, Draco's own interest in anything longer term than dirty weekend escapades in Paris was nil. He'd done the longer term thing once, a 2-year engagement to Astoria, and it had been sufficient to confirm that, no matter how pure-blooded and well-bred the witch, he wasn't ready for marriage. Granger's note earlier that day offered a convenient lifeline. Draco grimaced and said, "I'll be working. Business in Somerset tomorrow." Granger herself didn't know she'd have company, but too bad for her. He'd call it a spot check. Her safety against threats, real or imagined by Shacklebolt, was his highest priority, after all. Narcissa seemed unsurprised at the ready excuse. "A pity. Next time, then." Dinner concluded. Draco retreated to his chambers, where he took a long bath and nursed his training wounds. His jotter buzzed. He summoned it to find a note from Granger, a delayed response to his earlier question. "Yes, one of the asterisk holidays. A spot of sightseeing. I'll turn the ring if I need you." That last sentence was Granger's speak for "I don't need you, do not come, you are not invited." No doubt she would get shirty when he turned up. The thought elicited an unexpected tingle of amusement. Then something that had been percolating in the back of Draco's mind since dinner clicked into place. He got out of the tub, dried himself off with a few waves of his wand, and summoned Granger's schedule. Tomorrow was, what had his mother said? Imbolc? And that coincided with one of Granger's asterisks. Were there other such interesting coincidences? He ran through the rest of the dates. The next asterisk was a weekend in late March. Then one at the beginning of May. Then June. Then early August. Abuzz with anticipatory triumph, Draco descended to the Manor's library, where he pulled out a few volumes on Celtic and Germanic pagan traditions. He was right. Granger's dates matched the old calendars. Draco rolled the old words out on his tongue. Imbolc. Ostara. Beltane. Litha. Lunasa. Mabone. Samhain. What was Granger up to? Draco was officially intrigued. Hilda. Draco gave Granger the morning to set out on her Somerset adventure before he joined her. That permitted him an exquisite lie-in, some invigorating flying in the February wind, and the opportunity for a luxurious brunch. He kissed his mother's cheek with insincere regrets about missing tea. Somerset was just far enough from Wiltshire that Draco had to flew into a wizarding pub in Cannington before apparating to Granger's ring. The apparition took a moment longer than usual, with an odd sort of stretch in the final half-second, like it was trying to keep up with the destination. When he arrived, Draco understood why. Granger had been moving at a rather rapid pace, given that she was belting down a country lane in her car. Granger shrieked as Draco materialized in the seat beside her. His head was in the passenger footwell and his boots were, by the feel of it, in Granger's face. It was altogether not his most graceful arrival. Granger swerved onto a verge and brought the car to a halt. Draco turned himself the right way up with difficulty as a barrage of questions came his way, including what the hell he thought he was doing, who did he think he was, how dare he, and whether or not he was actually insane. Granger's voice could be quite shrill. Penetrating, really? You just apparated to a moving target. Have you completely lost the plot? You could have been splinched into 100 different pieces, scattered about the A37. I didn't expect it to be a moving target, said Draco, feeling disheveled and a bit sick. Why are you driving? Because you told me apparition and flu were traceable. Who cares if they're traceable? You're allowed to be on holiday. Nice morning for it, by the by, he added, as rain pelted the car. Unless your holiday has something to do with your project? Granger glared at him. Aha, said Draco. Seeing that the worst of the fracas had abated, Draco, having spotted a mirror just above Granger's head, swiveled it towards himself. It was the perfect height to check one's hair. Good sorts, muggles, really, they had their priorities straight. Granger sputtered. Did you just commandeer my rearview mirror to fix your hair? You can have it back in a moment, said Draco. Granger was staring at him with an expression of dislike strong enough to unnerve a lesser man. She swiveled the mirror back towards herself. I need that. And get your overlarge feet off my dash. It's not my fault your car is so cramped, said Draco, attempting to bring his legs in. It's not my fault you're a gangly marionette of a man who decided to apparate into my Mini. Before Draco had time to register his offense at this unfair comparison, she got to the crux of the issue. And why are you here? I'm conducting a spot check, said Draco. A spot check, repeated Granger, looking thoroughly unconvinced. Yes. And? Have you established that I'm sound of mind and body? Draco examined her critically. She seemed sound of body, from what he could see under the hat, anorak, scarf, and muggle walking boots. Soundness of mind was less easy to gauge, there was a sparkle of something dangerous in her eye. Well? She pushed. I'm fine, as you can see. You can go away now. Draco decided to take the high road and attempt some honesty. I'm also using this as a pretext. A pretext for what? Avoiding some unpleasantness at home. What sort of unpleasantness? Relentless sort of which. My mother is having ladies over for tea. Whatever Granger was expecting, it hadn't been that. A queer expression flashed across her face, as of one holding back a laugh. Ladies over for tea? She repeated. Yes. What is so funny? I thought it'd be something more fearsome. The held back laughter faded. Anyway, I don't want to suffer because you're afraid of some ladies. I don't need, nor want, you hanging about today. I have things to do. It's Imbolc today, said Draco conversationally. Did you know? Granger said nothing, but looked freshly annoyed. What are you up to in Somerset at Imbolc? Asked Draco. I didn't know you kept the old ways. You don't seem the type for flowers and dancing about poles. When Granger didn't answer him again, Draco settled himself into his seat. I've assessed the situation and, since it's obviously to do with your dangerous project, I will be monitoring you today, for your own safety. Per item 11 of my recommendations. Don't argue. I will eject you from this car, said Granger. You can't do that. I can. This button, here, said Granger, pointing to a round thing on the dashboard. It's a safety feature Muggles invented. A whining whistle began to wail through the car. Granger jumped. What is that? Oh, that, said Draco. A safety feature wizards invented. I put a sneakoscope in your glove box, as you suggested. You lied to me about the eject button and I'm hurt. Granger leaned over him and popped open the glove box, ow, my knees, to see that there was indeed a sneakoscope therein. It whistled and flashed for a few moments more, then, given that there was no more lying going on, it stilled. There was a long silence. Granger pulled back into her seat, leaned her forehead on the steering wheel, and appeared to be collecting herself. Fine, she said at length. You can stay for the duration of this distressing tea of your mother's. Just don't get in my way. She turned the key and the car's engine kicked into life. Put on your seatbelt. Or don't. I suppose I don't care if you die a gruesome death. The sneakoscope wailed again. Granger swore at it quite colorfully. What does that button really do? Asked Draco when the row had faded. This innocent question seemed to set Granger off anew. It used to be the stereo system, until someone's warding messed it up. Now it only plays Austrian folk songs. Draco pressed the button. Austrian folk songs began to play. Granger's hands were tight on the steering wheel as she pulled back onto the road. It was clear that, in her opinion, Draco was the real nuisance or Hilda. Muggle signposting was excellent. As they made their way down progressively windier country lanes, Draco was able to guess at their final destination with a degree of certainty. Glastonbury, he said. Interesting. Granger said nothing. Her displeasure at his presence continued and she was not hiding it. It mattered little to Draco. A rainy drive through the English countryside with an angry Granger was a refreshing change from the usual 2 small sandwiches and coquettish fortune hunters. Honestly, the winding drive, the Austrian music, the fuming witch, it was absurd, it was amusing, it was fun. Draco reached to press another button on the car's central panel, out of curiosity. Granger slapped his hand away. She had decent reflexes, reflected Draco as he sucked on his stinging knuckle. Instead of driving down the street that led into the town of Glastonbury proper, Granger made a detour to a car park at the edge of a forest. There, a footpath wound into a woodland, rather soaked and frosty looking at this time of year. What's this? Asked Draco. The Mendip Way, replied Granger, in that way she had of answering his questions without actually answering his questions. She got out of the car. I'm going for a walk. You may wait in the car. May he? So generous. Draco, after a brief struggle with the handle, let himself out of the vehicle. He withheld groans as he stamped some feeling back into his legs. Granger observed his emergence from the Mini with her hands on her hips. He felt her observing his choice of clothing, his aura robes over his perennial suit, and footwear, perfectly functional dragonhide boots. She must have concluded that it would have to do, or otherwise, that it wouldn't do, and would put him in peril, and that was perfect. At any rate, she turned around and began to walk towards the woods. Draco saw her cast some rain-repelling and warming charms on herself. He imitated her. It seemed a good idea. As they entered the Mendip Way, Draco cast a few detection spells, looking for evidence of other beings, magical or muggle. However, it seemed that only he and Granger were mad enough to go for a ramble on a day like this. Save some roe deer in a nearby clearing, they were alone. Satisfied that no madmen were about to vault out and attack Granger, Draco caught up to her in a few long strides. It quickly became obvious that this wasn't just a walk for Granger's health. She was looking for something. Or several somethings. She peered into the underbrush, touched the trunks of trees, gently caught the fronds of ferns in her palm and studied them. She took nothing, however, and so quashed any theories about ingredient gathering that Draco might have been entertaining. They progressed in this manner for a good half hour, marked by a pause to refresh their fading impervious charms. Finally, Granger stopped, and pulled out a list. Draco unashamedly peeked over her shoulder. Singing sedge. Greater bladderwort. Royal fern. Aphaeglossin vulgatum. Wood sorrel. Mellifluous honewort. Helianthemum apenninum. Helianthemum nummularium. Spiny rest harrow. Tassel moss. Granger used her wand to cross out the majority of the list. Only the tassel moss remained. What's tassel moss? Asked Draco. Granger flinched away from him. Apparently, She'd been so much in her own head that she'd quite forgotten that Draco was there, much less noticed that he was skulking over her shoulder. Her hand flew to her fast-beating heart. Draco felt faint echoes of it through the ring. He expected to be told off. However, her bad mood seemed to have been replaced by tentative excitement related to this list. "One of the rarer mosses in this part of England," said Granger. "Why are you looking for it?" Granger began to walk again, her attention focused, this time, on dead logs, old stumps, and other likely habitats. "Because it will confirm that I'm in the right place." "The right place for what?" Granger waved the question away. "I'm merely confirming a theory." "What theory?" Draco, too, could be relentless. "Something related to my project," said Granger with irritating ambiguity. "What's moss got to do with your chimera cells, or whatever?" "Nothing, at least, not directly." She turned to look at him through the rain, as though to gauge what was worth telling him. "I'm retracing the steps of an old, long-forgotten witch whose work included, amongst many things, descriptions of certain sacred sites in the British Isles." "So, the Vale of Avalon?" "Specifically, Glastonbury's Wells. Or at least, that's my educated guess. Not much of her work is still extant today. All we have are fragments. She tended to wax lyrically on flora, which helps me narrow down possible locations by cross-referencing the rarer plants. Of course, she was writing hundreds of years ago, so things may have changed. But few places on the island will support both singing sedge and mellifluous honewort. They typically thrive in radically different ecosystems, as you no doubt know." No, Draco didn't know. In fact, he'd never even heard of these plants, but he nodded instead of admitting it. When Draco next looked up, for a heart-stopping moment, Granger had disappeared. He snatched his wand, then he saw her backside poking over the edge of the path. She was on her hands and knees, examining a rather wet ditch. Whatever had caught her eye, it wasn't what she was looking for. She regained her feet. She didn't look disappointed, however, she looked determined. "And muddy." "Tassel moss looks as you'd imagine," said Granger. "Tiny tassels across the top. It's the Sporangia, unusually big in the genus. They turn pink in the summer, of course, we're a little too early for that." Was this woman a genius at herbology, on top of everything else? Draco wondered how much of Potter and Weasley's limited scholarly success was due to absorbing her knowledge by intellectual osmosis. She was, frankly, overwhelming. Granger carried on along the path, squatting down occasionally to observe things. It was altogether rather a peaceful ramble, with the charms keeping him dry, the sound of the rain and the occasional brave songbird, and verbalizations from Granger telling off various mosses because they weren't the right one. For the first time since he'd taken the Granger case file from Tonk's hands, Draco felt glad of the decision. This was certainly more pleasant than most of his work as an Auror, fewer hexes and eviscerations coming his way, for a start. And, bonus, it got him out of tea with the ladies, and promised many more opportunities to do so. That set would be tut-tutting at Granger over their teacups, Granger with her hat askew, her face smeared with dirt, clambering about in ditches instead of finding herself a rich husband. But she was apparently doing something great for Wizardkind, and what, pray, had they achieved? "I think I found it," called Granger. Draco pushed through some brambles to be, once again, presented with a view of Granger's bum. Familiarity breeds fondness, he was rather developing an appreciation for it. For reasons known only to herself, Granger had all but pressed her face into a patch of moss and was breathing deeply into it. "Granger, what?" "It's meant to smell like candy floss." "And it does," said Granger, rising with a leap. There was dirt on the tip of her nose. In the shadows of the great oaks around them, her dark eyes shone with excitement. A curl of hair clung damply to her lip. Her cheeks were pinched pink by the February wind. Her smile flashed at him, a brief, rare thing. Draco realized with a shock that Granger was pretty. She clapped her hands together and squealed at the clump of moss, as though it was a treasure worth thousands upon thousands of galleons. Before Draco could process his realization, a hoarse scream echoed from some distant corner of the woods. To his amusement, Granger leapt to his side immediately, her wand raised. The queer screaming continued. When Granger saw that he hadn't reacted and didn't seem alarmed, she asked, "What is that horrid racket?" "That's a fox," said Draco. "Oh. Some slag of a vixen's asking to get her back blown out." "I see," said Granger. Another scream. Draco wanted to laugh. Granger's expression had gone rather prim. She pulled out her list of plants and crossed the final line out. This is an excellent development. The moss, I mean, not the slaggy fox. Let's go back to the car. That's it? Asked Draco. It had seemed rather easy. Oh, no, said Granger. If only. I have about 3,000 other things to do before that's it. Knowing her, that was probably not an exaggeration. They walked back to the car. Without Granger's constant hops into the vegetation, it was rather quicker than the way in. Why did you have to do this on Imbolc? Asked Draco. In his opinion, this would have been better planned for Beltane, for more congenial weather. She ignored the question in favor of posing one of her own. Do you think your mother's guests have left? Draco conjured a pocket watch. No, he lied. Are you sure? Rather a long tea, isn't it? Society teas are multiple-hour affairs. My mother's favorites will probably stay for dinner and drinks. Granger's moment of smiling amongst the oak trees was fading and being replaced by the annoyance that seemed a chronic condition in Draco's presence. Why don't you go somewhere else? She won't know that you aren't strictly working. I'm not leaving, said Draco. If you were to be attacked while out and about on project work, Shacklebolt would have my hide. What are you protecting me from? Asked Granger with a sweeping gesture at the nothingness around them. Randy foxes? If you'd tell me what you were doing, I'd be better able to establish potential threats. If there's one thing I've learned from the enormous mistake I made telling Shacklebolt, it's that I'm not sharing another word on my work. Granger crossed her arms. Her posturing was rather undermined by the single leaf stuck in her hat, waving in the wind. Brilliant. I'll just continue to wave my wand about, waiting for the nameless baddies, shall I? No. You can apparate to the nearest pub, have a cozy drink, and go home when you're safe from the ladies. I'm not the one who needs to stay safe, said Draco. Granger made a sound of frustration. You can't come. You complicate things. Complicate things how? I can stay out of the way, didn't I just stay out of the way? I'm visiting the Chalice Well Gardens next. That involves passing as a muggle. Which you don't. I can very well pass as a muggle, said Draco, indignant. The Auror program includes a substantial unit on concealment and disguise, and I passed with a distinction, thank you. Had he just been thinking that Granger minding had ended up being a good decision? Why must she fight him on everything? Granger rubbed at her temples. We're wasting time I haven't got. Then let's go, said Draco. Show me your best attempt at a muggle disguise, said Granger. There was a desperate kind of hope in her eyes, as though she knew it was going to be rubbish, but wanted to see, just in case. Draco shrank his Auror robes into a handkerchief, which he pocketed. Then he modified his suit to fit the current muggle fashion, a little more relaxed in its tailoring. His boots he made into shiny men's dress shoes. His wand was concealed in a holster at his wrist. His hair he didn't touch, it was the height of perfection, magical or muggle. And? He asked, rotating slowly under Granger's critical gaze. It'd be ideal if we were going to the Dorchester for dinner, said Granger. She sighed. But, I'll take it. Maybe we can make you look like a spiffy young professor, rather than a banker who's lost his way. She approached and made her own modifications, removing his tie and transfiguring his shoes into muggle trainers. Then she reached up and undid the top button of his shirt. Queer sensation, to have Granger do that. Draco filed it away for further analysis later. That'll have to do, said Granger, though she looked cynical. If we're critiquing each other's appearances, you're in need of a Scourgify, said Draco. Granger transfigured her car window into a mirror to discover, with an oh, my, quite how mud-caked she was. She made quick work of the stray leaf in the dirt, then gave Draco an odd look. What? Asked Draco. Nothing, said Granger. Tell me, said Draco. No. Yes. I might have expected some joke about the mud, from you, said Granger. Draco stilled. Those days are long past. Granger arranged her hat and shrugged. Draco frowned. This wasn't the time for this conversation, but one day she would need to know how he had seen, firsthand, the horrors of those hideous attitudes, and how they still lived in his head in the dead of night, and how much he wished he could take back. I'm not that person anymore, said Draco. Seeing that he was so solemn, Granger, too, grew serious. All right. I shouldn't have brought it up. I shouldn't have insisted, conceded Draco. That too. Granger waved her wand and her erstwhile mirror became a car window again. She grew brisk in her movements. Shall we? Let's, said Draco. Then he ruined the serious moment by needing help with opening the car door. Granger came round to help him with saintly patience. She did not, to her credit, cast any aspersions on his ability to behave like a muggle. Chapter 5, The Keepers. Chapter text. They drove in silence for a little while. Granger looked preoccupied. Her thumb tapped at the steering wheel and she was worrying her lip. It's going to be busy this afternoon, said Granger at length. At the gardens, I mean. Let's try to keep a low profile. We have to go through the gift shop to buy tickets to go in, but after that we'll be able to go into the gardens themselves and avoid the worst of the crowds. I can keep a low profile, said Draco. Granger gave him a side eye in lieu of response. Does the water have magical properties? Asked Draco. Why do the muggles even know about it? Granger sat up straighter and took a breath, and Draco realized that it activated SWAT mode. The wellsprings in this area have been in use by both muggles and magical folk for millennia, said Granger. It would have been too difficult to wipe the entire thing from so many minds after the statute of secrecy, I suppose. But, to answer your question, muggles only know of 2 water sources in Glastonbury, one they call the White Spring, and one they call the Red Well. No real magical properties in either, though muggles have ascribed their own spiritual and mythological significance to both. They have stories linking them to the Holy Grail, and King Arthur, he's meant to be buried in Glastonbury Abbey, and other bits of legend. They were now approaching the outskirts of town. Granger turned at a sign pointing to the Chalice Well Gardens. But, she continued, there's a third wellspring, one that you won't find in the Muggle brochures. It's called the Green Well. That one has bona fide magical properties. I need here. Granger hesitated, but seemed to decide that Draco would work it out anyway. I need a sample from it. For your project? Yes. And why at Imbolc, specifically? You're being rather too inquisitive, said Granger. Draco felt that she meant meddlesome, but had chosen the more polite option. I suppose the well reaches its highest magical potency at Imbolc, said Draco. Granger made no answer. I'm right, aren't I? He saw her glance at the glove box, wherein lay the sneakoscope, promising to give away blatant lies. Stop being so curious, said Granger. That's a bit rich, coming from you. She scoffed. Being curious is literally my job. I'm a researcher. Your job is to protect me from forces unknown, not interrogate me on a highly confidential, proprietary project. Granger pulled into a parking spot, turned off the car, and waited for his retort. This which was, something. Draco had never endured such unrelenting points and counterpoints. He rather felt that, if he'd been keeping track of the score, he'd be the losing party. I'm not a bodyguard. I wasn't assigned to you to clomp along brainlessly behind you, said Draco. No. You're a highly trained, highly competent Auror and this is an utter waste of your time. Granger took a breath, visibly suppressing her irritation at the entire situation. The opening compliment elicited a tiny spark of delight, quickly suppressed by Draco. He didn't care what Granger thought of him. A group of muggles passed the car, distracting the both of them. Mutually deciding on an unspoken truce, very temporary, Draco was sure, they climbed out of the car. The car park was busy. Muggles in families, muggles pushing prams, muggles in outfits that seemed exceptionally outlandish, even for muggles. I'll warn you now, there are a lot of new agey types here, said Granger as they joined the crowd headed towards the entrance. New agey? Hippies. Wiccans. Pagans. Woo-woo types. Granger seemed to be struggling for a definition. Muggles who are very spiritual and believe in magic, or greater powers, anyway, to some extent. Some of them even call themselves witches. They don't realize that there are actual witches and wizards, of course, and actual magic. They collect crystals and things, and perform rituals they read about in old books. Ah, said Draco, though he didn't really understand. I thought muggles were meant to be relentlessly logical. Some are, said Granger. Some are, rather less than logical. Or perhaps some part of them remembers magic. Or subconsciously knows it exists. Or maybe they just want to believe in something. They entered the busy gift shop, bustling, cloyingly over-scented. Granger saw Draco wrinkle his nose and said, "That'll be the essential oils. The New Agers love those." Draco examined some offensively perfumed candles, labeled for relaxation. Why doesn't someone tell them they've oversynthesized these things to the point where any minor magical property is utterly lost? Draco now found himself being steered by Granger and parked in a corner of the shop, like a Draco-shaped Mini Cooper. "Stay here," she said. "I'll get us tickets. Don't break anything." Thank goodness for that last tip. He might have begun to pulverize things out of sheer excess of spirit, otherwise. Shoving his hands into his pockets, Draco stood in the corner and watched Granger go. The crowd around her didn't look at her twice. She really did blend in. As for him, he was the subject of more than a few upward glances, his height, his white blonde hair, his spiffy suit. Granger had now joined the slow-moving queue for tickets. Having his principal away from him in a busy spot was not something that Draco was keen on, from a purely professional standpoint. He performed some surreptitious legilimency on a random sampling of the people in the shop. The crowd was comprised mostly of muggles. There was one wizarding couple, but they had no ill intent, nor any idea that Granger was here. Would they recognize her if they saw her? Maybe, but Draco couldn't delve into their minds so precisely from this distance. Granger's instructions to keep a low profile were rather hypocritical, given that she had just struck up a conversation with the muggles in the queue behind her. Draco, annoyed, cast a surface-level legilimency on the family to check for sinister intentions. Nothing of interest, they were just friendly tourists. He grew aware of a presence lurking about him, peeking at him from around one shelf, then around the other. He pretended to be interested in the smelly candles. Eventually, she showed herself. She was a shop assistant, heavily draped in diaphanous scarves, observing Draco with bulbous eyes. A name tag was pinned to her jumper, Eunice. "Hello," she said to Draco. "Might I help you find something?" Draco caught her gaze and read her immediate thoughts. Nothing ominous, save for the fact that she thought him dreadfully handsome. "No, thanks," said Draco, turning back to watch Granger between candles. She was finally nearing the front of the queue. Instead of taking this as the firm dismissal it was, Eunice fluttered closer to Draco, her eyes glued to his face. "Your aura is disturbed," she said. Draco felt like he was being addressed by a muggle incarnation of Trelawney crossed with a large moth. "I don't think these candles will do you good," said Eunice. "I agree with you there," said Draco. The sarcasm was lost on her. She nodded to herself and palpated the air around Draco, as though grasping at something. "I'd suggest something stronger, like one of our cleansing incenses," said Eunice, drifting down to point at a different shelf. Draco watched Granger make a beeline to the cafe bar. Would she kindly hurry up and save him from the moth? Eunice was now holding her hand towards him with her eyes closed. She shook her head gravely. "Your heart chakra is underactive." "Is it?" "The Venus incense, I think," said Eunice. She grasped a packet and waved the pungent thing under Draco's nose. "Although, with your need for grounding, perhaps the Saturn." She rummaged around the shelf and said things about transmuting energy and ascending to the celestial plane. Draco spied Granger's hat bobbing in his direction through the crowd. "I have to go," he said, making his escape. "Oh, do you?" Eunice seemed put out. She slipped something into Draco's hand. "My card. I do chakra realignments. Do reach out, our energies are quite compatible." Eunice floated away just as Granger arrived, bearing coffees. "Who was that?" asked Granger, observing the retreating flutter of scarves. "Eunice," said Draco. "She gave me this. Do you need your chakras realigned?" Granger exchanged one of her coffees for the proffered card. Something had been scribbled hastily on it. "Ooh, she gave you her number." "What's that mean?" "That Eunice fancies you," said Granger, looking amused. "Most women do." Granger snorted, like this was a wickedly funny joke instead of a universal truth. She caught herself, sobered up, and looked at him with fresh wonder. "You're funny, Malfoy." "I live to serve," said Draco, to cover his vexation. Granger returned the card to him. "Too bad you don't even know what a mobile is." Poor Eunice was quite barking up the wrong tree. "She thought me dreadfully handsome." "She also thinks your chakras need realigning." "Let's not get too wrapped up in the soundness of Eunice's judgments," said Granger crisply. Let it be known that if any man needed his ego checked, a simple exchange with Granger would quite set him to rights. Draco sipped at the coffee Granger had brought. It was, remarkably, not terrible. How did you know I like double espressos? Granger shrugged. It seemed your style. Bold? Bitter? Overpriced. Draco hid his scoff in the cup. Granger set them on a course towards the gardens. The rain began to let up and make way for tentative sunlight. The gardens were unexpectedly lovely, even if the muggles in charge didn't have access to the warming charms and magical additives that made wizarding gardens such a spectacle through winter. Draco thought his mother might even appreciate the place. Though it was February, there was color about, thanks to careful plant selections. Musical gurgles of water from wellsprings everywhere added auditory interest, and the whole thing was gently illuminated by hundreds upon hundreds of candles tucked away in stony recesses. Signposts here and there asked visitors to maintain silence, out of respect for those meditating. Granger cast a silencing charm around the two of them so that they could talk. They came upon the Red Well, aptly named, with its rust-colored water. Draco read the plaque with passing interest. As Granger had noted earlier, the Muggles had fabricated some fanciful bit of Christian mythology suggesting the Holy Grail was buried here. There were also a few references to Arthurian legend. The Muggles know about Morgan Le Fay? Asked Draco, an eyebrow rising at the sight of such a famous witch's name on a Muggle placard. Yes, but she's a figure of myth, said Granger. Most of them don't think she really existed. Draco tutted. Imagine. Next, they strolled through the well house that contained the White Spring, a dark, wet-smelling place, where Muggles had decorated the rough stone walls with candles and small shrines to deities real and imagined, Saint Brigid, the Lady of Avalon, the King of the Fairies. Here we are, said Granger, as they made their way down a quieter, less used path round the back of the well house. There should be a sort of platform to take us down to the Green Well. We'll have to use our wands to get in. Let's disillusion ourselves in case any Muggles pass by. Granger was now a Granger-shaped patch of garden in front of Draco, glimmering in the weak February sun. They stopped, well, Granger stopped, and Draco ran into her, at what looked like a manhole cover, tucked halfway under a bush. Across its weathered, cast-iron surface, were two large circles, intersecting under dead leaves and moss. That symbolizes the interplay between the physical and spiritual worlds, said Granger. Draco could make out her ghostly wand gesturing at it. You might recognize the shape, the Red Well is constructed the same way. Let's get on. It's the platform down. They stood together on the manhole cover, rather squished. Incantation? Asked Draco, getting a mouthful of Granger's invisible hair for the trouble. Vesica Pisces, said Granger, mimicking the circular symbol with a wand wave. The manhole cover shuddered. Granger crept closer to him. She smelled like a gorgeous combination of rain, wet forest, cappuccino, and soap. Then, without a by your leave, the platform dropped out from under them. The gorgeous-smelling witch clung to Draco and pierced both of his eardrums with her shriek. Thank the heavens for those silencing charms, thought Draco as they fell. A thick cushioning spell met them at the bottom of the drop. Which was excellent, as Draco hadn't intended to break both of his ankles today. He and Granger landed, bounced painfully into each other. He was quite certain he elbowed her in the tit. She narrowly avoided his groin with her knee, and collapsed, spread-eagled, on a thick bed of glowing fungi. Wow! A first-class voyage, drawled Draco in the dark. Gah! Responded Granger with something less than her usual acumen. Draco rose. Granger was somewhere on his left. She didn't seem to be making out quite as well as he was. She was rather shocked. See, couldn't they set up a levitation charm? She asked weakly. I thought that thing was a lift. I didn't expect a harrowing plummet to my death. Draco groped about in the dimness to find that his coffee was a lost cause. A pity. They dismissed their disillusionments and, when Granger managed to find her feet, began to walk down a passage illuminated by large, bioluminescent mushrooms. The sound of trickling water echoed throughout. Draco saw that even the walls were wet with a constant stream of moisture. As they entered a kind of long, low-ceilinged cave, Draco saw that there were other witches and wizards about. In a corner was what looked like a kind of bookshop, which Granger eyed longingly. There was also a counter that served as an apothecary. The entire place was lit solely by the glow of the mushrooms, which were everywhere, the floor, the walls, dangling from the ceiling. Omphallotus luxuturna, said Granger. Pretty, in a slimy sort of way. If she added a like you, Draco was going to hex her, his ego had taken enough abuse today. She didn't. It was almost disappointing that she'd let the occasion slip. They came at last to the green well, a bubbling green-lit wellspring, flanked by 2 statues in the penumbra. At least, Draco had thought they were statues, until they moved. The keepers of the well, said Granger, who seemed unsurprised at the sight. Right. You stay here. I need to do the talking. They have to be dealt with politely. And respectfully. Ignoring the insinuation that he couldn't be polite or respectful, Draco said, I think I'd rather come. His eyes strained to get a sense of what, exactly, lurked in the mushroom-speckled darkness. Granger's irritation flared immediately. You said you wouldn't get in the way. You're not even meant to be here. This is delicate. And critically important. Fine, hissed Draco. I'll stay here. He was within hexing range, anyway. Granger advanced. Draco peered at the 2 black-draped, hunchbacked forms. Were they witches? It was hard to tell in the dark. If they were witches, they most certainly had hag blood, somewhere up the family tree. As well as a few other things, no doubt. Their twin pale stares, as luminescent as the mushrooms around them, disconcerted him. He found himself gripping his wand as Granger stepped up to the nearest of the keepers. His first thought, as he processed this situation, was that Granger was either stupidly brave, or absolutely fucking reckless. Secondly, he didn't like this at all. These beings felt dark. Old. Dangerous. Yes, Tonks, she was killed by a hag. Yes, I was right there. Yes, I let her walk right up to it. Yes, she was disemboweled right in front of me. She wanted to pop by for some fancy water from this well, you know, nothing else would do. Here for a fill, dearie? Croaked the keeper to Granger. The husky, dry voice echoed eerily. Yes, if I might? I have an offering, said Granger. Her figure was a slight silhouette, backlit by the luminescence of the green well. Show me, said the keeper. The creature leaned towards Granger. There was something hungry in her movements. Draco's wand hand twitched. If the thing moved any closer to Granger, he had a decapitation curse ready to be unleashed. Granger, as always, was well prepared. From somewhere in her anorak, where? She produced 3 large satchels, which she passed into the claws of the creature. Grain, offal, gold. The second keeper shuffled over, stuck her talon-like fingers into one of the bags, and pulled out a handful of glinting galleons. And where had Granger come by an entire sack of galleons, by the by? The gold's provenance did not seem to worry the second keeper, at any rate. She crooned her satisfaction. Very nice. Lovely. Let the good girl through. The first keeper gestured Granger forward. Haven't you got a vessel, child? Granger produced a large flask, whose golden stopper shone in the dim light. Yes, will this do? The thing wheezed in assent. At a gesture from the keeper, Granger plunged the flask into the green well. The second keeper stared at Draco, as though aware of his tightly gripped wand and the well-practiced curses that awaited on his tongue. She sniffed the air in his direction. Put the wand away, little boy. This girl won't be meeting her demise here. The first keeper looked up from where she stood beside Granger. The wizard is worried, is it? It is. The first keeper's white eyes caught Draco's. There was ancient magic in them. He dared not perform legilimency on this old mind. She cackled as though he had spoken aloud. That's right, you won't. Silly boy. I'd make your brain soup and drink it while it's still warm, wouldn't I? But look at his eyes, sighed the other keeper. Eyes like the rain-troubled skies. Cold dread trickled down Draco's spine, though the creature hadn't spoken a direct threat. He wondered whether his darker curses would even be of use against these things. Perhaps he should be thinking light. Don't you start with the rhyming, said the first keeper to her sister. We don't want to mess with his melon. I'm finished, said Granger, who was now holding up her dripping flask. It was a blessed interjection. Draco was genuinely beginning to feel spooked and trigger-happy. Good girl, said the first keeper. Mind you use it wisely. I will, said Granger, stepping away from the 2 of them. Thank you. Love and light, my girl, said the first keeper. She and her sister cackled, as though that was the most riotous thing they had ever heard. Granger gave them a kind of bow and came back to Draco's side. He kept his grip on his wand until they'd walked well out of the keeper's line of sight. Even then, he felt the twin pairs of white eyes touching at the back of his head. "No," he said, holding Granger to him when she darted towards the underground bookshop. "But I wanted to." "No," said Draco, his grip on her elbow unyielding. "Let's go." Granger seemed to sense Draco's anxious anger and did not argue further. They walked back to the low passage that led to the platform, Granger taking 2 steps for every one of his. When they were finally out of the central cave, Draco turned her to him. "What the fuck was that? You might have told me you were off to barter with dark creatures." Granger's face was pale in the phosphorescence. "I didn't know they'd be so haggish? Cadaverous? Lethal? The way the first one was eyeing you, she looked like she wanted to pluck your bloody liver out. And you walked right up to her. No wand." "Stop manhandling me," said Granger, shaking off his hands. "She was not going to pluck out my liver. They were nice to me. And they're certainly not hags." "Not hags?" sputtered Draco. "You presented them with offal. That's a traditional gift, it's what you're meant to bring to the keepers of the well." "Who look like hags, and smell like hags, and eat like hags," enumerated Draco, with irritated vigor. "They don't eat like hags. You've just given them the ingredients for awful couscous. If those weren't hags, then what the hell were they?" "I don't know. They, or successive incarnations of them, anyway, have recurred in texts about the Green Well for centuries. They're usually described as crone figures. They aren't evil. They're ancient. They were bloody she-dementors, and you're never to deal with that kind of creature again, without telling me first. I need you to understand that if anything happens to you, Shacklebolt will have my head, then Tonks will have my balls, then Potter and Weasley will scavenge the rest. My mother would bury me in a Marmite jar. Do you understand?" "Fine. But you're overreacting." Granger shook her flask of water at him. "I got what I came for. I was prepared. I said the right things and brought the right gifts." Now she hit her stride and went on the offense. "You almost threw a wrench in the works, getting so bloody hostile that they started taunting you. They could have told you things that would have tormented you for years." "What things? What do you mean?" interrupted Draco, freshly disturbed. "Nothing," said Granger. Seeing how intensely he was looking at her, she stepped back. "It's stupid." "What things, Granger?" repeated Draco, looming over her now. She hesitated, but, in the face of his agitation, gave in. "It's just, part of the legendarium surrounding the keepers suggests that, it's silly, and obviously made up, suggests that they are seers." "Seers," repeated Draco. "One of them knows when you die, and the other knows how you die." Draco shuddered in spite of himself. Granger tucked a curl behind her ear and began to babble. "It's all speculation, of course. Storytelling. It's such a common conceit in old magical texts. They love giving guardian figures added mystique with alleged powers. I don't put much stock in stories involving precognition, of course." Draco cut into her ramble. "How can you be so cavalier about that kind of legend? You're literally best friends with the most precognitioned, prophesied, prognosticated, bollocksing boy who fucking lived." Granger straightened and looked ready to sink her teeth into this new argument. That was a highly unusual occurrence. Draco stared into space, running a hand through his hair. "I think one of those hags was about to say something, too. She started talking in rhymes. Fuck me. I wonder which she knew, the how or the when." "The tales are utterly unsubstantiated," cut in Granger like the chief swat she was. "They don't know anything. Don't start thinking about it." "Too late. I am thinking about it." "What rhymes with skies?" asked Draco. "Flies? Spies?" Somehow, Granger was squeezing her large flask of well water into a pocket of her anorak. The impossibility of it distracted Draco from his morbid suppositions. What is this, the anorak of 1,000 pockets? How did that fit in there? You didn't even shrink it." "I'm a dab hand at extension charms," said Granger, rather too lightly. "Can we?" "So that's how you were carrying around those unholy offerings for the voodoo twins," said Draco. Finally, one Granger mystery solved. "You do know that those charms are heavily regulated by the ministry, don't you?" "I'm aware, thank you," said Granger, snippy. "If I'm reported by anyone, hopefully not present company, if he knows what's good for him, I'm prepared to pay fines in exchange for the convenience. Oh, I see. Is that why you haul enormous sacks of galleons about? For fines? No. I carry those for ballast. Granger fished about in her pocket and, for a wild moment, Draco thought she was going to pull a sack of galleons out to swing at his head. But no. She merely produced her wand and waved it to tell the time. Ugh, I'm late. I had one other thing to do, but you've put me so far behind schedule. Draco raised his eyes to the mushroomy ceiling. Of course it was his fault. What thing? He and Granger squelched their way towards the manhole cover nestled amongst the fungi. A moment of pure self-indulgence, said Granger. I've wanted to go for ages and now I'm in the area, but what? You're here, said Granger. And I don't want you to be. Too bad, said Draco. Any trust I might have had in your judgment has just been obliterated by your decision to haggle with hags, without a single sodding contingency plan if they got peckish. Granger made a sound that was more growl than anything else. Anyway, what's self-indulgence? What's your vice, Granger? None of your bloody business. I promise I've seen worse, whatever it is. Granger ignored him, disillusioning the two of them while Draco made guesses at her secret peccadillo. A brothel? Getting detention? Awful couscous? They stepped onto the platform. Draco heard the invisible Granger take a deep, steadying breath. It served her well for the long scream that accompanied their expulsion to the surface. And just like that, they were back in the Chalice Well Gardens, blinking in the sunshine. Draco couldn't immediately step off the platform. Granger was holding onto him like a drowning creature clinging to a lifeline. An echo of her heartbeat and fear thundered through his ring. Her grip shook. She was terrified. She made to step away, but her knees buckled, and she swung back into Draco instead. Fucking, damned, sodding, gah, said Granger into Draco's chest. A brilliant observation, said Draco. His voice seemed to bring her back to herself. She held him for a moment longer, then took a shaky breath and stepped away with a muttered apology. Draco glanced about for muggles and, seeing none, he cancelled their disillusionment. Back in the realm of the visible, Granger looked bloodless. That was awful, she said. I thought it was rather fun. Yes, well, you're also one of that diverse cohort of lunatics who enjoys Quidditch. Oi! They followed the meandering path back to the entrance of the gardens. Draco could see that Granger's hands, well, her fingertips where they peeped out of her anorak, were still trembling. She ran her hands down her arms a few times. Right. You needn't worry about me ever coming back to barter with the Voodoo twins. I never want to use that death trap again. If I need another sample, I'll just send you. Me? Said Draco. Not a bloody chance. One of them wanted to sip my brain out of my skull, or didn't you hear that part? She'd need a rather thick straw, mused Granger. Funny. You could land headfirst on your way down. Next time, make a bit of a milkshake for her. Draco stared at Granger. Perhaps it was healer humor, but she could be grisly when she worked off her adrenaline. Maybe it was a good thing she didn't play Quidditch. Then again, pondered Draco, she might make an exceptional beater. No bludgers needed, Danger Granger could collapse psyches with a few syllables. They passed through the gift shop, Eunice gave Draco a lovelorn look, and through the car park back to Granger's Mini. Is there anything I can say that will make you go away? Asked Granger. No, said Draco. What if I ask nicely? No. I'm not going to go interact with anything dark, or anyone at all. It doesn't even have anything to do with my project. Draco studied her. She looked genuinely crestfallen that he was going to ruin a third activity on today's list. He decided to be charitable. Tell me what it is and I'll decide if it's dangerous or not. Perhaps I'll wait in the car. Granger checked her muggle pocket device. Apparently, it gave the time, amongst other things. Damn it. They're closing in an hour. Get in. I'll tell you on the way. They got in without mishap, Draco having now developed an expertise in opening muggle car doors. One thing before we go, Miss Dabhand at Extension Charms, said Draco. Extend this foot well before I behead myself with my own knees. Hilda. As it turned out, Granger's moment of pure self-indulgence? Her terrible indiscretion? Her vice? Visiting a library. A library? Repeated Draco. Yes. At Tynesfield. Draco wanted to scream with laughter, but felt that would be unprofessional. He settled for gasping out, "The decadence." "I wish you'd go away," said Granger with cutting sincerity. "The absolute sin of it all," said Draco. "Please apparate home to your mother." "A library? I shall have to report it." "As you can see, I'm quite safe here. The only remotely bad things are your attempts at humor. What other naughty habits have you got? Church going? Baking? It's a remarkable library." "Of course. It must be. And I don't know when I'll be back in Somerset." "Yes. It's one of the largest libraries owned by the National Trust." The estate also has a beautiful orangery, a rare surviving example from the late Victorian period." "A thrill, to be sure. All of these are things I wish to enjoy without you." Draco spotted the clenched jaw that signaled Granger reaching a breaking point. Either a jinx, or a painfully incisive remark was forthcoming. He backed off. "Fine. You can visit your blessed Titsfield. Tynesfield. And I shall wait in the car. I can sincerely say I haven't the slightest desire to join you." The rest of his sentence was overpowered by a sudden wail. Draco swore. "The sodding sneakoscope." Granger took her eyes off the road to give him a look of absolute surprise. "It's malfunctioning, clearly," said Draco. "Clearly," repeated Granger somberly. Draco gave the glove box a harrowing glare. "Hoisted by your own petard," said Granger. All of her previous annoyance had dissipated. She was most definitely holding back a grin. The wail faded. "I'm going to throw that blasted thing out of the window," said Draco. "Don't. I've grown rather fond of it." Thanks to some rather zippy driving on Granger's part, speed limits? A suggestion, really, as the sneakoscope sang, they made it to Tynesfield half an hour before closing. Granger was able to partake in the library and the orangery, and Draco enjoyed a poppy seed cake from the cafe, and they watched the sunset together, and only quarreled 4 times. Chapter 6, Finding Serenity. After their Imbolc outing, Granger all but disappeared from Draco's life. He visited her laboratory and home once a week to recast the wards, but their schedules rarely coincided, and he saw her cat more often than he saw her. Occasionally, his jotter would buzz, and inform him that Granger was attending X public event at Y location. As her assigned Auror, she left his attendance to his discretion, though she made it clear his presence would be superfluous at best and bothersome at worst. Most of the events took place in secure magical locations, panels at St. Mungo's or Huntercombe, symposia at magical universities, so Draco had rarely seen a need to exert himself and attend. In the unlikely event of a research panel devolving into a situation, they had the rings. Tonks, seeing that Draco's reports had become rather rote and that the Granger assignment was taking up only a little of his time, gleefully piled on additional missions. The cruel reward for competence was more work, and Draco wondered whether Potter and Weasel and their general bumbling wasn't the better plan, after all. And so, Draco found himself bunking with Buckley in a dingy hotel in Manchester, where they were gathering intelligence on a group of dark artifact smugglers. Buckley was a good sort. He was a newish Auror, overeager and keen to prove himself, which meant that Draco could take on a more, well, he would call it managerial, role, and delegate the majority of his surveillance shifts to the lad. This would, as Draco nobly explained to Buckley, permit him to garner more hands-on experience. Buckley nodded with enthusiasm and put Draco in mind of a puppy. He thus foisted off the 3 a.m. watch onto his zealous young colleague and went to bed. Draco felt as though he had just fallen asleep when his ring burnt him awake, pain and an elevated heart rate, reverberating from Cambridgeshire. It was 4:30. Nothing good ever happened at 4:30. Draco leapt out of bed and pulled his cloak over his pajamas. He was too far across the country for a direct apparition to Granger. He blasted a fire into the hotel foyer's dusty grate and flew to a Cambridge pub, and from there apparated to Granger's ring. Draco materialized in Granger's spare bedroom, the one he called the ritual room. Granger was contorted into a dreadful, sweaty knot on the floor. Draco cast a flurry of hominem revelio and finite incantatem, looking for the invisible assailant who was obviously casting Crucio on her. "Malfoy?" came Granger's strangled voice from the floor. Draco's revelation spells showed absolutely nothing. "What the bloody hell are you doing?" asked Draco. Granger collapsed out of the horrid tangle and found her knees. "Yoga. What the bloody hell are you doing?" Draco had seen this mysterious term on Granger's schedule. That's yoga? What kind of self-inflicted martyrdom? Now that he had ascertained that there was no immediate threat, Draco could take in the scene. There were candles flickering in a corner and soft music was playing. Granger was outfitted in those ridiculously form-fitting muggle clothes, khaki green this time. Her hair was pulled into a French braid, thick as Draco's wrist. Granger was looking at him like he was an absolute bellend. I was trying a Terexvashana. A what? A scorpion handstand. I've been working towards it for weeks, and I almost had it, until you came in like a bolt from the blue and frightened me out of my wits. Draco was feeling increasingly foolish. He pulled his cloak close to cover his pajamas. There was little he could do about his bare feet. What, pray, is the point of yoga? Flexibility. Strength. Balance. Finding serenity. Draco eyed Granger with cynicism at the last bit. Have you found it? No, said Granger. She got to her feet with evident irritation. Kindly recalibrate your ring so you only show up in a real crisis. She flicked the electric lights on. Her cheeks were flushed. A trickle of perspiration was running down her neck. Her chest still heaved from her exertion. Draco could smell salt, female sweat, and the burnt wick of a candle. His idiot brain took this image and immediately created several new neural pathways that had never existed previously, connecting the idea of Granger with the concept of sexy. It was an extremely unwelcome development and Draco wondered whether he should lobotomize himself on the spot. A gravelly meow interrupted his thoughts. The bandy-legged cat had wandered in. It trotted up to Granger and then, upon noticing Draco, favored him with a hiss. Draco did not hiss back, but it was a near thing. I'll just leave then, shall I? Said Draco. Do, said Granger. Goodbye. Draco disapparated out. Hilda. Draco had expected, and rather desired, nothing but annoyed silence from Granger after he'd barged in on her like an unhinged maniac. However, he was surprised to receive a message from her the next day, and not just a message, a bona fide apology. Malfoy, I'm sorry about my behavior yesterday. I should have been more appreciative that you arrived so fast when you thought something was the matter. Will warn you next time I try a Terexvashana. Hermione. Apologies weren't part of Draco's natural lexicon. His upbringing, both at home and at school, didn't encourage the practice. Sorry was an admission of wrongdoing, a sign of guilt, an obvious weakness. There was something nice about receiving one, however. It warmed the soul, really. He wasn't sure which part he liked the most, Granger mulling this over for a day and then apologizing, or Granger admitting she'd been wrong, or Granger appreciating him. Instead of dismissing her note from the jotter, Draco saved it in one of the back pages. He'd have to ask Potter how rare Granger apologies were, and whether he ought to have it framed. Draco, darling, you're distracted. His mother's voice, with an undertone of reproach, called him back to reality. Reality was an unfortunate place, tea in the stuffiest parlor at the manor, with his mother, her friend Madame Delphine Delacroix, and Madame Delacroix's daughter. Today's debutante was Rosalie Delacroix. Beauxbatons educated, pure blood, objectively beautiful. Draco put the jotter away. Pardons-moi, mesdames. Que disiez-vous? Vous avez un jabbering jotter, exclaimed Rosalie. Those have only just begun to cross the channel to us in France. We can't get enough of them. Even my mother, who is so traditional, adores hers. Indeed, nodded Madame Delacroix. I couldn't get my husband to reply to an owl, not for love nor money, but these make it so easy. A true innovation. England should be proud of these, Weasleys, was it? These Frere Ballet? When the conversation drifted away from him, Draco sent a response to Granger, do advise of future scorpion push-ups. P.S. Apologies from you may become my new drug of choice. D. Draco looked up, a vague smile on his face, to find Rosalie chattering about an upcoming gala that her father was going to host. Draco had missed the beginning of it. In support of orphans, or something, probably. We would be so delighted to see the two of you there, said Rosalie, her hands clasped into a knot of entreaty. It's such a good cause. They helped father so very much, you know. The orphans helped Augustine Delacroix? Draco didn't care enough to seek clarification. His jotter buzzed. He checked it under the table to see a note from Granger. You do realize that I'd have to do bad things that warrant apologizing for. You do a great deal of bad things. I've compiled quite a list of your illicit activities, responded Draco. Qu'en pensez-vous, Draco? Would that suit you? Draco raised his head. Madame Delacroix had asked him a question that he'd only partially heard, something about his schedule in March. He answered in the affirmative, of course, yes, he'd be happy to clear his calendar for such a noble cause. His mother beamed at his easy acceptance and indicated that she, too, would be delighted to come. Granger answered, if only illegal extension charms were the worst of my sins. No, responded Draco, I know the real extent of your depravity. She anticipated him. I see that the library visit will haunt me. Draco grinned into his teacup. His mother saw the smile and, encouraged by what seemed like his good mood, asked the ladies if they'd like to see the gardens. Rosalie declined, claiming to have caught a bit of a chill. Madame Delacroix and Narcissa left for the gardens. Draco sobered up as he found himself in a forced tête-à-tête with Rosalie. The pretty witch spoke charmingly of anything she thought might catch his attention, Quidditch, his job, the weather. Draco listened with only one ear, because it wasn't about Hags wanting to use his skull as a sippy cup and it was therefore rather dull. He found himself wishing to be continuing a conversation with another witch, one whose newest message had just buzzed in his pocket. The talk turned to mutual friends, to upcoming dinners, to other frivolities. Rosalie agreed enthusiastically with every point Draco made, no matter how inane, instead of whipping counter-arguments back at him. She laughed at his mildest jokes instead of retorting with something snappy. She clung to his every word, uncritical, eager, instead of challenging him. She complimented him to excess. It made for rather weak conversation. When Draco realized who he had unconsciously made into Rosalie's foil, he was taken aback. Since when had Granger become the yardstick by which he measured female company? The conversation, such as it was, lasted 20 minutes. Eventually, Rosalie convinced Draco to add a page to his jotter for her, under the pretext of sending more details for the gala. Draco shrugged in absent-minded agreement. It was a careless moment he would later regret, as Rosalie was a proficient jotter and wrote to him incessantly thereafter. The ladies returned from their tour. Smiles were smiled, goodbyes were said, and Draco sighed in relief when Henriette the house elf escorted their visitors back to the flue parlor. Later that night, Narcissa drifted into Draco's study to probe. Rosalie is a sweet girl, isn't she? You seemed like you were getting along. There was such a quiet optimism in her voice, Draco wondered if it wouldn't be kinder to lie. But that would give his mother hopes, and dashing them later would be all the crueler. I suppose we got along well enough, he said. She detected the lack of enthusiasm immediately. But? Rather a milquetoast kind of girl. Narcissa's thin hands clutched before her in disappointment. Oh. Quarreling with his pale, sad mother was never high on Draco's to-do list. He tried to be gentle as he admonished her. We've had this conversation before. I don't need, nor want, you to handpick witches for me. I only want to help you. Narcissa's thin fingers clasped at each other. I want you to find someone who is educated, and lovely, and who will be a devoted companion, and give you children, and fill this great empty house with laughter again. Rosalie would be all those things. Any number of the witches I've introduced you to would be all these things. She paused, then added, I only want you to be happy, Draco. I am happy. Another sigh from Narcissa. At your age, your father was married, you know, and had you were 4 or 5 by then. I am not my father. Narcissa, seeing that she would make no further headway here, glided towards the door. I don't think she exists, she said over her shoulder as she left. Who? The perfect witch you're apparently waiting for. Hilda. Granger wrote to Draco about a week later, advising him that she was speaking at a Muggle conference that Thursday. Where? He asked. Magdalen College, Oxford, said Granger. Thursday 2 to 5 p.m. I'm on at 2.30. I doubt I shall be murdered, but leave your attendance to your expert judgment. Yes, Granger, thank you for the cheek, he would use his expert judgment. Audience? He asked. Muggle doctors, said Granger. How many? Asked Draco. 150, said Granger. Draco's eyebrows rose. He sometimes forgot quite how small the wizarding world was. There were probably less than 100 fully fledged healers in the entirety of the UK. Maybe 300 or 400 if you included meaty witches and other field medics. I'll look in, said Draco. "Spiffy professor, look please," said Granger. "Don't embarrass me." Draco didn't deign to answer her. The day of the conference came around. Draco apparated a small distance away from Magdalen College and walked to the auditorium Granger had specified, at the time she specified, wearing the clothing that she had specified. Bossy sort of witch, was Granger. The volunteer at the registration table was gently confunded into thinking that Draco was a registered participant, and he was let in with a name badge and a program. He took stock of the building, discreetly casting revelation spells when muggles weren't looking. The foyer, cloakroom, and toilets were free of any naughtiness, as were the back rooms. The handful of people he covertly cast legilimency on were who they were meant to be, brainy muggles, here to become even more brainy. Draco found a shadowy alcove near the front of the auditorium from which to survey the place. He was about 20 meters away from the stage, from which vantage he could see Granger seated at a long table, along with 3 of her fellow experts. They were chatting amongst themselves as the crowd filed into the auditorium. From a risk assessment standpoint, Granger couldn't have been more exposed, sitting as she was under a literal spotlight. Draco pried through the minds of the people in the front row and found nothing but eagerness to begin and high levels of admiration directed towards the doctors on the stage. Then he peeked through the minds of the unseated people idling on the stairs at the edge of the auditorium, as he was, and found only volunteers, students sneaking in, and a bearded gentleman wearing large ear coverings, whose chief role seemed to be managing blinky boxes with wires coming out. There wasn't a single witch or wizard present, as far as he could tell. Satisfied that there were no immediate threats, Draco cast precautionary wards across the front of the stage and settled into his alcove. As the conference began, he flipped open the program. It informed him that today's panel would feature international leaders in immune cell engineering and immunotherapy. This told Draco very little, of course. Cancer was a decidedly muggle ailment. Wizarding folk were rarely afflicted with it, and when they were, it was quickly resolved. However, it seemed that this was not the case with muggles, for whom it was a serious condition, and nigh incurable in some forms. Enter Granger and her cohort of fellow brains. Their talks today included such thrilling questions as FL and CLL, a new care paradigm and Hodgkin's lymphoma, mitigating toxicity while preserving cure. Draco decided that it would be quite safe to leave Granger to her CLLs. The only threat in this room was death by obscure acronym. Just as he was about to leave, he rather fancied a nap. The mediator announced that Dr. Granger's presentation was next. Draco watched her walk across the stage and decided to stay. She was a small figure on the stage, by far the shortest amongst the panelists. She smiled at the audience as she approached the Muggle voice amplification device on the podium. Her movements were confident and poised. She didn't have notes, but the large screens behind her projected diagrams and bullet points. She made a few opening remarks that included a joke that went completely over Draco's head, but the auditorium filled with laughter. Her presentation focused on the advancements of something called CAR T-cell therapies in B-cell malignancies. She made eye contact with everyone, took questions throughout, was challenged, counter-challenged the challengers, and defended her position without skipping a beat. She was confident, she was clever, and in this room, she was important. Granger in her element was a rather impressive thing. After finishing her presentation, Granger returned to the table and her fellow panelists discussed her talk. At some point, Draco wasn't even certain that Granger and her interlocutors were even speaking English anymore, as they cross-examined each other on EBV and TNK cell lymphomas and their diagnostic challenges, and the architecture of liquid biopsy research. Granger made a pun about MALT1 degradation which was, apparently, uproariously funny. Draco entertained himself by performing legilimency on the panelists. Not a single one thought that Granger was an insufferable swat. He found only respect, admiration, and a surprise crush from the male doctor on her left. Draco learned that something called quantitative radiomics analytics existed. Their predictive values were discussed at length. These Muggle doctors were another thing entirely, brilliantly working through the impossible, dedicating their entire lives to it. How had he ever thought Muggles base and ignorant? Draco shook his head. Granger must have caught the movement of his white blonde hair in the shadows. When saw that it was Draco, she gave him a brief smile of acknowledgement, bizarre feeling, that, and carried on with her current dissertation, her hands making wide arcs as she explained something. At length, conclusions were drawn, closing remarks were made, and the conference ended with much applause. The participants milled about, with Granger and the panel at the center of the crowd. Draco, feeling rather mushy in the brain from all the new words and legilimency he had performed, perhaps the keeper wouldn't need such a thick straw after all, decided that he was no longer needed here. He made for the exit, but Granger caught him as he passed the stage. As usual, small talk was dispensed with. Instead, he found his muggle disguise being assessed by her, her gaze accented by a raised eyebrow. Passable, was the pronouncement on the outfit. Why the eyebrow? Asked Draco. Granger pointed at the name tag that the confounded volunteer had affixed to Draco's lapel. Hello, Professor Takahashi. Ah, said Draco. Yes. That's me. And how is Tokyo at this time of year? Very nice, said Draco. Professor Takahashi is from Kyoto, said Granger. Her arms were crossed, but there was amusement in her eyes. Rather ballsy to pose as one of Japan's most renowned clinical oncologists. I am nothing if not ballsy, said Draco, flipping his hair. Did you know that the good Dr. Dreesen fancies you? Now Granger's second eyebrow joined the first, at her hairline. What? He's going to ask you out for drinks tonight. No. Yes. He also liked the skirt, said Draco, gesturing to the high-waisted, close-fitting garment in question. He also quite liked it, incidentally, Muggle fashion and its emphasis on bums was growing on him. I mean, he's very nice, but, wait, how do you know this? Granger's hand flew to her mouth. You did not perform legilimency on innocent Muggles. Part of my risk assessment protocol. Is that allowed? Bit of a violation of privacy, isn't it? Aurors have privileges, said Draco. Anyway, Shacklebolt gave me carte blanche to use whatever means necessary to keep you safe. Except for murder, I've got to get permission for that. There's a form and everything. Granger seemed 90% sure he was joking, but she was nevertheless eyeing him like he was the most unprincipled, depraved Auror ever produced by the Ministry, and it was just her luck that she'd been saddled with him. Dr. Dreesen popped by and, to Granger's evident dismay, asked her if she'd join him for drinks that night. Draco appreciated the guts, if not the subtlety of the approach. A few things happened very quickly. Granger moved to Draco's side, her hand found his chest in a gesture of affection, which conveniently hid his ridiculous name tag, and she announced that, unfortunately, she was already spoken for that night, but perhaps another time. Dr. Dreesen looked up at Draco, at his hair, perfect, his jawline, also perfect, his eyes, perfect, and icy, and perfect, and decided that he was quite outranked. Smart man. Of course, he said, backing off and looking flustered. So sorry, I didn't realize. Where are you two going? Said Granger. The Turf Tavern, supplied Draco. Classic, said Dr. Dreesen. Then, with a wag of his eyebrows to Draco, he said, just across from the Bodleian. You'll have to keep Hermione on a tight leash. Oh yes, said Draco, wrapping his arm around Granger's waist. I always do. He felt Granger's hand on his chest twitch. Well, lovely to see you, as always, Hermione, said Dr. Dreesen. Goodbye, Johann, said Granger with a rather fixed smile. Granger was tense as the man walked away, her body felt coiled and ready to leap away from Draco. Don't jump away like you've been burnt, muttered Draco. He's watching. Act natural. Granger cleared her throat and let her hand slide down Draco's chest, taking the name tag with it. She stepped away from him slowly and tried to make it look natural. It did not. Draco himself vacillated between amusement at her discomfiture and alarm at how nice the curve of her hip had felt against him, and how good she smelled, again. Granger peeled the Japanese professor's name off her palm. She looked discombobulated, which mirrored Draco's sentiments nicely. Sorry, she said. I had to come up with something, and you were conveniently, there. Use me as a prop any time, said Draco, scanning the crowd instead of looking at her. Granger was accosted by other colleagues, who had heard that she was going to the turf, and they were going too, so they'd see her tonight, and her first G&T was on them, pip pip, etc. Granger smiled faintly and waved them off. This may have been a mistake, was her somber conclusion. You can leave. I'll make up an excuse for you. This was a fine suggestion, except for one small problem. Upon a meticulous reflection lasting 8 seconds, Draco had decided that he rather wanted to go. But I want a G&T, said Draco. Granger was still muttering to herself and not listening. I'll tell them you felt sick, or something. Sick? I'm the picture of health. I'll say you ate something funny. I think not. There are hundreds of Muggle doctors here. If I say I'm sick, they'll all descend on me and try to cure me. I don't want anyone sticking a stethoscope up my bum. No one sticks stethoscopes up anyone's bums, said Granger in loud exasperation. Two conference participants who had been passing by gave Granger a shocked look. Granger watched them go, aghast. Oops, said Draco. Granger's jaw was tight. You are positively the worst. She turned and walked briskly away. Draco found himself grinning. And, speaking of bums, let it be known that Draco absolutely did not check hers out, nor did he find the view pleasing at all, nor did he slow down on purpose to watch her. Separately, with no connection whatsoever to Granger's bum, Draco concluded that robes were overrated. The Turf Tavern was a stupidly busy place, especially so when the conference had disgorged hundreds of thirsty participants into Oxford streets. Draco found a table while Granger got them drinks, G&Ts all around, and they found themselves crammed on a bench amongst a dozen of the finest immunologists and oncologists in the world, getting progressively more drunk. Draco was asked what he did for a living. Granger had gone rather worried-looking when the question was posed, TCH, had she no faith? But Draco had a well-practiced cover story at the ready. Tonks insisted on every Auror developing a few Muggle biographies, and some backup wizarding ones, and she quizzed them on their covers routinely to keep them on their toes. Draco shared his favorite. This evening, he was a pilot. Few Muggles knew very much about the technicalities of flying, so, unless he encountered a real pilot, unlikely, surrounded by tipsy doctors, he was safe. And, of course, he had a genuine passion for wizarding flying, which lent a certain veracity to his tales of aeroplane heroics. Flying isn't that hard, you know, he said to the table. Keep the blue side up. Laughter. The doctor beside him indicated that such simple principles applied in medicine, too. Keep the guts in. More laughter. Draco caught a wonder-filled glance from Granger, a mixture of pleasant surprise, and who the fuck are you? He twitched an eyebrow at her. She looked away, nonplussed. When asked when he'd arrived in Oxford, Draco said, this morning. When asked what he was doing in Oxford, he said Dr. Granger. Granger choked on her drink. More laughter. When Draco next stole a glance at her, Granger looked like she was going to lure him into a lonely alley and, there in the darkness, strangle him. Who knew that teasing the swat of the century could be such a glee-filled activity? Someone else joined their table to raucous cries of welcome, the real Professor Takahashi. Granger shuffled closer to Draco along the bench to make room. Draco bent over and whispered, ask him if he had any troubles with his registration. Granger kicked him. She spoke politely with the professor. Draco heard snippets of their conversation about Kyoto, but his focus kept drifting to the feeling of Granger's shoulder pressing into his arm, and her leg touching his under the table. A waiter arrived bearing more food and drink. Someone had ordered an enormous platter of cheese toasties, oily, salty, and served with onion chutney. Narcissa Malfoy would have had a heart attack just looking at the greasy things, oozing with 3 different kinds of cheese. Granger passed Draco the platter in an ambivalent kind of way, as though she expected him to turn his nose up at Muggle pub food. Draco took one. It was the best filth he'd ever eaten. Someone, somewhere, rang a triangular instrument, and called for those who wanted to join tonight's pub quiz to form teams. Some of the doctors at the table took this as a sign to depart. Others appeared amused at the timing, and eager to join in. I love pub quizzes, said the gray-haired woman on Draco's right. Half the fun is learning you're a colossal moron. Bet we get trounced by some freshers, said the doctor across from him. Nonsense, said a third. With Hermione here, this'll be a dawdle. You are staying, aren't you, Hermione? Granger glanced at Draco. What do you think? If you're tired, you can go back to our hotel. Draco appreciated the attempt at providing him an escape, but he didn't take it. He had rather an excellent buzz going, and he wanted to try this pub quiz thing, and there was the warmth of a woman at his side, and it was all rather nice. Pish tosh, of course I'll be staying. There were cries of brilliant. And then there was a general kerfuffle as everyone looked for paper and pens. Draco was of absolutely no use for the first handful of questions, which focused on Muggle politics and sports. However, he did know how many keys a baby grand piano has, 88, and what year Cessna was founded, 1927, And which country's national anthem had 158 verses? Greece. All 158 had been sung at the last Quidditch World Cup. There were a few biology and science questions which the doctors hammered into the ground with an unnecessary level of detail. Draco learned that Picolax was used for something called colonoscopy preparation. One of the doctors nodded grimly and said, "Night of 1,000 waterfalls," and Draco was too frightened to ask for clarification. Then they quibbled with the host over the definition of subcutaneous and quite intimidated the poor lad until he gave them the point. The history and art questions would have sideswiped the whole team, but for Granger, who pulled them through. Then, to general groaning, they were hit by mathematics exercises, and the team of youngsters beside them whizzed through the lot and left the doctors sweating in the dust. "Engineers," said one of the doctors. "We never stood a chance." Granger, still stuck on a problem, looked vexed. Then geography, then music, then zoology, which Granger was solidly capable of handling with occasional assistance from her colleagues. Draco didn't even attempt to help. He was on his fourth drink, and working out what monotreme meant was too deep a philosophy for him to pursue at the moment. In the end, their team won, largely thanks to Granger. "We'll have Hermione registered with English Heritage as a national treasure," said one of the doctors, giving Granger a pat on the shoulder. Granger smiled, but her gaze quickly returned to the maths problem that had tripped her up, scrawled out on a napkin. The winning team received vouchers with some kind of monetary value. The doctors handed over theirs to the young engineers who had come in second, saying it hadn't been a fair fight, since their combined years at uni were greater than the poor engineers' years alive in the first place. The evening wound down. The place grew quieter as most of the crowd left after the quiz, except for Draco, who was rather enjoying the drinks, and Granger, who was still working on the maths thing. Eventually, she poked one of the youths at the table next door and asked for an explanation. "It's Borel's paradox," said the boy. "Oh," said Granger. "Obviously." The mystery was unlocked and she scribbled out the solution on her napkin. Then she threw down her pen with finality and stood up. "Let's go," she said. Draco rose to his feet with care, waiting to see how much the drinks were going to catch up with him. It wasn't too bad, considering. The cheese toasties turned out to be rather absorbent. "Have a nice night, you two," said the barkeep with a wink at Granger. Granger gave him a rather sickly smile and all but ran for the door. Outside, neither of them was quite walking with their usual level of booze-free confidence, though Granger was certainly getting on better than Draco. At one point, she pulled him to her, just as he had been about to collide into a lamp post. "You're meant to be watching over me," she said. "Not the other way round." "That pole came out of bloody nowhere," said Draco into Granger's hair. She stepped away from him until he was firmly at arm's length. "How are you getting home? And don't say apparition. I'll stun you if you try." Draco was quite certain that, even in his giggly state, he'd be quicker on the draw than her, but, nevertheless. "Flu, I suppose. There's a connected hearth at my hotel. This way." Draco followed her through Oxford's storied streets. The booze was settling and the philosophy began to flow. He felt generous and at ease with the world. Those muggles today, they were all rather clever. "Yes," said Granger. "You're rather clever. With all the diagrams, and the malts, and carts, and things," said Draco. It felt important that she know this. She gave him a sideways glance in the dark. "Thank you. And please stop, you're frightening when you're nice." "I'm frightening? Go back to making fun of my hair." "Fine. It's horrid. You should shave it off." "Better," said Granger. "Don't actually, though," said Draco. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Here we are," said Granger. She pushed open the door of a small wizarding inn. The reception desk was empty and the fire in the hearth was low. Granger waved her wand at the embers and they blazed back to life as though she'd cast a full incendio. "Are you a dab hand at fires, on top of the extension charms?" asked Draco in the face of this demonstration. "A bit," said Granger, with unconvincing false modesty. "I heard you set fire to Snape in first year," said Draco, "but I didn't believe it." "Good, that's utter bollocks," said Granger, not meeting his eye. "You're a bad liar." "Off you go," said Granger, sidestepping the remark and gesturing him towards the fireplace. "I'm shattered and need my bed." "But I want the story about setting fire to Snape," said Draco. "Go home," Malfoy. Seeing that he was getting nowhere, Draco threw flue powder into the fireplace. You're positively no fun. Malfoy Manor. The flames glowed green. His last sight, as he looked back, was of Granger, her arms crossed, her hip cocked to one side. Her dark eyes observed him like he was a fresh maths theorem to unpuzzle. On one hand, it flattered his ego to have intrigued the great brain. On the other, given her propensity for solving things, it rather frightened him. He didn't want to be solved. Good night, Malfoy. Draco stepped into the fire. Chapter 7, Ostara, Contrariness of Granger. Chapter text. Draco's next warding visit to Granger's house was marred by what was, in retrospect, a slight lapse in judgment. As weeks had gone by and he had made little further headway on discovering the nature of her research project, his mind turned to a certain object of interest in her study, the tattered grimoire on the plinth. The one that she had threatened to cry about. And so, one morning in early March, when Draco was preparing for his perennial visit to Granger's cottage, he sent her a note indicating that he'd be going into her house, if that was all right, because he hadn't warded the windows individually, and it was bothering him. Granger acquiesced with a dry, "If you really find it necessary." Yes, he did. Draco timed his visit to coincide with one of Granger's lessons at Trinity, to ensure that he wouldn't be disturbed as he snooped. When he arrived, her cat, perhaps sensing something nefarious afoot, took up a position of power on the roof, and stared at him as he recast the outside wards. "Only doing my job, cat," said Draco, making a great show of it. The cat regarded him with cynicism. He entered the cottage and warded the first-floor windows with alacrity, then bounded upstairs to do the others. Granger's bedroom was done first, with minimal looking about, because the cat was at the door, and watching him. Then the yoga room. Then, finally, he came to the study. The grimoire was still on its plinth, open in the middle, still surrounded by the green glow of stasis charms. Draco warded the window under the watchful eye of the cat and drifted towards the tome. The cat's stare grew more penetrating. Draco peered at the visible pages. Through the stasis charm, the words were blurred and seemed to dance. The script was labored and heavy. It wasn't English, in fact, bits of it looked French, Anglo-Norman, perhaps? In that case, this was an old book, 5 centuries, at least. From the bits that he could understand, he was looking at an elaborate description of a landscape, a green hill under dancing bluebells, and gleaming thistledown, and the velvet soft leaves of Folly's gossamer. That was all that Draco could make out, the rest was too damaged. He remembered Granger's moment of volubility at the Mendip Way, something about descriptions of Flora giving her clues for her mysterious pursuit. None of the plants mentioned here had featured on her list, however. This must be a different site. He dearly wanted to see the book's cover. He glanced at the cat. The cat all but shook its head. "Just a quick look," said Draco to the cat. "I might be able to help her, you know." The cat whisked its tail in disapproval. Draco did it anyway. Using his wand as a lever, so that he didn't touch the book at all, he lifted the cover enough to peek at the front. It was entitled, Revelations. The cat meowed a wrathful meow. Draco let the cover fall back into place and left the cottage rather quickly. Hilda. Draco didn't know how, but Granger suspected something. First his jotter went off with a series of messages, questioning him about whether he had touched the book. Draco denied some more, and then stunned the jotter so it would stop buzzing. Then Granger somehow got hold of Boethius, and used Draco's own owl to send him increasingly heated queries. Draco sent Boethius off with a missive to a friend in Italy, which would keep him out of Granger's hands for at least a week. Then a howler landed on his lap in the middle of a briefing with Tonks. It got as far as, "Malfoy, did you before Draco incinerated it?" Tonks' eyebrows rose. "Was that Hermione?" "Yes," said Draco. "That explains that," said Tonks. She gestured to the faux glass behind her. One of the shadows looked rather familiar in form, a slender woman, a pile of curls on her head, her hands on her hips, silhouetted against the gray. "I suppose she's having violent thoughts about me by proximity to you," said Tonks. "What did you do?" "Nothing," said Draco, which was essentially true. Tonks stared at him for a long time, her fingers tapping against her desk. "I will assume that whatever you did was done in your professional capacity as an Auror, to ensure her continued protection." "That is always my primary objective," said Draco. Tonks gave him another long look, then turned back to his report on the dark artifact smugglers. Be careful, Malfoy. Thus dismissed, Draco returned to his cubicle. He had barely sat down when a silver otter dove at him out of nowhere. It called him a nosy prat and a bloody liar, and advised him to jump off a bridge. Draco sent his own Patronus back with a request to Granger to kindly keep her loud otters to herself. He was working. For a short while, that was that. Draco kept an eye on Granger's schedule to spot breaks in her calendar during which she might decide to come and find him in person. She did not, possibly because she was saving lives or other such tomfoolery. That was when he noticed that another of her asterisk holidays was coming up rather soon, that weekend, in fact. So, Ostara is coming up, he jotted casually that evening. Her response was instantaneous, if off topic. That book was not yours to touch. Where are you going at Ostara? Asked Draco. You are not invited, said Granger. Don't need an invitation, said Draco. I do not need supervision by prying nitwits, said Granger. See you soon, said Draco. She didn't respond. Bit pouty, sometimes, was Granger. Hilda. The not invited prying nitwit had a lovely lie-in on Saturday before getting ready to apparate to Granger. Frankly, after her hijinks with the keepers of the well, she had lost any privileges she might have had to make calls about whether or not she needed Auror supervision. Draco had no faith that Granger wasn't about to throw herself into a den of vampires to get her hands on some other obscure flask. Those virtuous reasons aside, the timing of Granger's weekend escapades continued to serve Draco's purposes. Today, Granger's frolic, whatever it was, coincided with one of his mother's luncheons. Draco was glad of the excuse to be away, even if his mother promised that she had no ulterior motives and that the presence of any young, eligible witches would be coincidental. Draco flew to the Mitre, the usual Cambridge pub, and from there he apparated to Granger's ring, which brought him to her kitchen. And, lo and behold, there was the ring, but there was no Granger. You're bloody joking, said Draco to the ring on the kitchen table. Only the cat responded, a pitiful meow at his mistress' absence. Your witch is a pain in my arse, you know that? The cat curled itself into a sad orange loaf at Draco's feet. Draco pocketed Granger's ring with a mutter. Then he pulled out his wand and cast his tracking charm. Good thing he made contingency plans. In front of him glowed a map, and on that map were points of light brighter than the rest. Granger's old trainers remained, it seemed, in her laboratory at Trinity College. The tea mug was somewhere in this cottage. The handful of her hairpins that Draco had charmed were rather scattered, some at the laboratory, some at St. Mungo's. A single hairpin was currently gambling through Uffington, for reasons unknown. Reasons that Draco was rather eager to discover. Draco apparated to the hairpin. Surprise, he said as he materialized before Granger. She jumped a meter into the air, which was satisfying, and then swore at him, which was even more satisfying. Draco looked around to find himself at the top of a green, windswept hill. It was a strange kind of formation, tall, but flat across the top. The turf below his feet was rich, green, and deliciously springy, except where it was interrupted by large splotches of chalky white. All around him undulated a lovely vista of rich pasture lands, meandering hedgerows, and wandering sheep paths. Now Draco turned his attention to Granger herself, who was all kitted up in her muggle walking gear. Her hair was in a high ponytail, which lent her a sporty kind of air over her usual scholarly bun. Her nose was pinkened by the March wind. Her brow, of course, was marred by a frown. How the bloody hell are you here? Asked Granger. Where are we? Asked Draco. How did you find me? What's in your anorak? Asked Draco, because it looked suspiciously puffy. Granger zipped the anorak a little tighter. Her bright eyes grew dull with a sudden veil of occlusion. Nothing. There, I've answered one of your questions, now you answer mine. That was a lie, though. Well, that's all you're getting from me, said Granger. She began to make her way down the hill and away from Draco. I don't want to speak to you. Don't you? Because you exploded my jotter, commandeered my owl, and then sent me a howler and an angry otter. Oi, where are you going? Away from you, said Granger. Draco was annoyed. Had he missed whatever she'd come here for? Her Ostara thing? He must have. She was hippity-hoppeting her way away from him, looking altogether too pleased. He shouldn't have had quite such a luxurious lie-in. Granger. Get back here. We're not done, said Draco, hippity-hoppeting behind her down the hill. I'm done here, said Granger with an exaggerated lightness of spirit. I wouldn't know about you. You need to wear the bloody ring, called Draco to Granger's bouncing ponytail. She clambered on, ignoring him. Then, without an iota of warning, she bent over. Draco narrowly avoided ramming into her with what would have been full pelvic contact. Yes, Tonks. She broke her neck falling down a hill. I thrust it into her too hard. Yes, it was an accident. Yes, she's dead. Please return my body to my mother in the fewest pieces possible. Granger sprang up again, holding a sprig of something aloft. What's this? She asked. Draco stared at the thing. A plant. Specifically, gossamer. Do you know what kind of gossamer? Began Draco, remembering the old tome. He caught himself. Frankly, I've no idea. Follies. It's Follies gossamer. Good for folly. But you knew that, because you read the book. Granger's facade was cracking. She looked slightly manic under it. Draco waved the plant away. Taking the ring off wasn't in our agreement. You're to keep it on at all times. That's the entire point. Granger, who had turned to continue her descent, whipped back around. Her ponytail slapped Draco in the face, a severe injury for which she did not even remotely apologize. Do you know what else wasn't in our agreement? You breaching my trust and touching my things. Ah, there it was, the shrieking. I didn't do anything to your book. You weren't to touch it in the first place. That book is beyond price. Whipping around again, and hitting him in the face with her hair again, Granger stormed down the hill. Put the damned ring back on, Granger, said Draco. No. I'm through with your surveillance device. Fine, called Draco to her retreating back. I'll tell Shacklebolt that I'm through and he'll have you actually put under surveillance. With Aurors who will literally watch you round the clock. Every move, every fucking vial of what sits you pour in your laboratory, and every word you plonk into your computers. Granger stopped. She made a strangled noise. Draco took that as agreement. He stomped towards her. Hand, he said. Granger stuck out her hand. Draco grabbed it roughly. He wanted to put the ring on equally roughly, to show her how cross he was, but he didn't, out of fear of breaking her finger. There was a moment of blessed shriek-free silence while he slipped the ring back on. Oh! Came a voice. Some Muggle walkers had just popped around the side of the hill. Cries of delight followed, an engagement. And what a lovely couple. And congratulations. And what a beautiful spot for it. Anyway, Draco hadn't known that Avada Kedavra could be cast using only one's eyes, but Granger was doing it quite competently. Then she turned to the Muggles and made some sounds of agreement and false joy to move them along. Draco did not join in because he was dead. The walkers eventually bimbled off, having wished them well in their wedded life and provided inane advice to Draco. Granger was grasping her sprig of gossamer destructively. As soon as the Muggles left, she flung it at the ground and asked why this was her life. Draco assumed that the question was rhetorical and so did not respond. He pulled out his wand and walked to where the Muggles had rounded the corner. What are you doing? Asked Granger. I'm going to obliviate them all, said Draco. Don't, said Granger with unexpected vehemence. Memory charms are not to be used lightly. But. Now Granger was beside him. She snatched his wand hand and pulled it down. Don't. It doesn't matter. I promise you that those Muggles won't be tarnishing your reputation or going to the Prophet with this supposed development. I don't care, said Draco, because he didn't. I thought you cared. You just garroted me with your eyes. You don't care? Granger looked, for once in her life, perplexed. I thought you'd care. Why would I care? They're Muggles. I don't know. Never mind. Are we done here? Are you done here? Yes, said Granger. Then so am I, said Draco. Granger stamped off through a kissing gate to a car park. Draco lingered long enough to watch her maneuver the car off the grassy verge and onto the winding country road. She drove off without a backwards glance. Her registration plate said CRKSHNKS. Draco disapparated with an irritated crack. Hilda. A few days later, Draco got ready for Wednesday night Quidditch, which he hosted on the Manor's well-manicured pitch. Kitted up and ready to go, he flew towards the pitch, where the usual miscreants were waiting: Zabini, Davis, Flint, Doyle, and other old school mates, and a handful of whatever players they'd rounded up for tonight's game. "Oi oi," waved Flint. "The Chief Toff has arrived," announced Doyle. "Wind your neck in, Doyle, or I shall do it for you," said Draco, angling his broom down to their altitude. Doyle raised his beater's bat at Draco in mock threat. "I'm more equipped to be bashing heads in." "5 on 5? asked Davis, edging his broom between them and obviously eager to get started. "Let's do it." They played. It was after 8 when they started, but the pitch was magically illuminated, and permitted a long game full of questionable rule interpretations and feats of near death. The snitch was an elusive thing that night. Neither Draco nor the opposing seeker had much luck, and they were both subject to taunting by their teams as a result. Midnight came around and Davis said shit, the missus was going to have his head for staying out so late. They agreed to call it a draw, given the uselessness of their seekers and the otherwise even score, and to carry on next week, and celebrate the eventual winner with too much drink. Pops and cracks reverberated across the pitch as the players disapparated home, leaving Draco with the whole thing to himself. Now he could have some fun. He flew lazily upward in long loops, farther and farther up, until the pitch was a green rectangle far below, and the Manor was a doll's house, softly glowing in the night. Then he angled his broom down and plummeted into a Ronsky feint. He pulled up at the last minute, barely holding in the whoop of joy that wanted to burst through his lips, and spiraled his broom back towards the black sky. Once again, the pitch was a small green rectangle below, but Draco flew up even higher, until he fancied there might have been wisps of clouds between him and the earth. He dropped again, relishing the wind on his face, the paralyzing sensation of the plummet, the adrenaline bursting in his veins. It was glorious. It was freedom. He pulled out of the dive at the last moment possible, his heart singing in his ears, his toes clipping the grass. The soft, but distinctive, pop of an apparition echoed across the pitch. He looked about for who it was, ready to tease Davis for running away from his wife. But it was not Davis. It was Granger. Had she come to berate him about that damned book? Draco flew in low and drew his broom to a hovering halt in front of her. "What the hell are you doing here?" But Granger didn't look angry. She looked confused. Her wand was held aloft, sparkling green healing sparks. In fact, she looked as though she'd just rolled out of bed. Her hair was in a long plait rife with escaping curls. She wore muggle shorts and a large, well-worn University of Edinburgh jumper. Her legs and feet were bare. I felt you," she stammered, gazing about at her new surroundings in bewilderment. "Your heart rate was through the roof, and your adrenaline spiked, and it was horrid." "No, it was wicked," corrected Draco, still catching his breath. "I thought you were about to die." "Hang on, how did you feel it? How the hell are you even here?" "The bloody ring," said Granger, waving the hand with the ring in question in his face. "Impossible," scoffed Draco. "It's only one way." "Then how am I here, you utter crumpet?" This was a fair point and Draco was forced to consider that he might have to revisit his charms. His ire rose, however, because the malfunction was most certainly her fault. The only crumpet here is the one who took off the ring when she wasn't meant to and damaged something. That spell work is delicate. Granger held her hands aloft, as though she couldn't believe the absurd turn of the conversation. "I didn't come here to argue about who is the bigger crumpet." "It's you," said Draco. "And since you came barreling here in your pajamas to ascertain my well-being, I can confirm that I'm fine. You can go. I'm sure you have better things to do." This statement of fact was, apparently, the wrong thing to say. Granger's shriekiness increased. "Better things to do? Me? Oh, no. My life is a lovely plinky-plonky time. Granger. I love nipping down to the Quidditch pitch in the middle of the night. In March. Barefoot. To trade insults with Draco fucking Malfoy. Positively adore it. I've so little to do, I've been thinking of taking up lawn bowling. Ships in bottles." She cut herself off, having mercifully been interrupted by something touching her neck. She flinched away. "What is?" At the nape of her neck, glinting teasingly at Draco, was the snitch. Draco glided closer and plucked it away. "Been looking for this bugger all night." "Wonderful. So glad I could help," said Granger. Her teeth were clenched, but it wasn't out of anger, Draco belatedly realized, it was from the cold. She took a breath and appeared to be assembling what remained of her dignity. Since you're quite all right, might you take me to the nearest flue? Why the hell did she need him to take her anywhere? Draco landed beside her, realizing at last that Granger did not look well. She was white-lipped, pale, and shivering. Did you apparate from bloody Cambridgeshire? Asked Draco with dawning comprehension. It took a few sets, said Granger through her clenched teeth. I did a double shift at St. Mungo's this morning, so between that and long-distance apparition, I'm rather drained. Draco cast a warming charm on her, his irritation at the situation now giving way to anger. She had depleted herself of far too much magic on his account, the reckless idiot. What, exactly, was the plan when you arrived to save my life with almost no magical reserves? I was going to put a plaster on the injury, said Granger, but the sarcasm was blunted by the violent tremble that shook her shoulders. Sod off with the lecturing, I wasn't thinking. I was asleep and the next thing I knew, this damned ring was screaming at me that you were about to die. Draco felt that he should be touched, though his displeasure at her imprudence rather overshadowed it. Right. So I might have been in the middle of a duel with a gang of dark wizards and you decided to pop along barefoot, magicless, in your gym jams. Bloody brilliant. It was a reaction, hissed Granger. I'm sorry I didn't pause to evaluate my options when I thought you were in the midst of dying. I'm a healer, odds were strong I'd have been able to do something about my non-existent grievous injury. Right. Draco hopped back onto his broom and drew near her. Get on. I'll fly you to the manor. You can flew home from there. No, said Granger, backing away. Draco assumed, with no small degree of exasperation, that her objection was the flying. Fine. He jumped back off his broom and held out his elbow to her instead. I'll apparate us to the manor. Let's go. You look about to faint. Granger backed away again. She looked even paler. No, not the manor. Please. Apparate me to the Swan. I'll flew from there. What's wrong with my bloody flu? Asked Draco, close to losing his patience and snatching her arm to force a side along. My mother's in France this week, if that's what you're. No. It's not your mother. I just don't want to go back there. All right? She wrapped her arms around herself. At this moment, the formidable Hermione Granger looked small, pale, and afraid. Draco realized, horridly late, that it was his home she was objecting to. That the manor still held the horrors of the war. He was an idiot. He offered his elbow again. The Swan, then. She took it. Her hand was light on his arm and, against his sweat-soaked Quidditch kit, it felt cold. They apparated into the cloakroom of the Swan, the boisterous wizarding pub that served as a waypoint for Wiltshire flu travel. The voices of the pub's patrons rumbled cheerfully through the walls. Draco cast a notice-me-not on himself and Granger, which served to avert gazes from them as they exited the cloakroom and made their way to the hearth. Draco noted that Granger was still holding his elbow, in fact, she had begun to lean on him. He tossed a handful of flu powder into the fire and Granger gave the name of the wizarding pub nearest her cottage, the Mitre. You haven't enough in you to apparate home from there, said Draco. My cottage isn't on the flu network. I was going to walk, it's only a few minutes, said Granger. Draco made a sound of disbelief. You've proven that you're an idiot once tonight, but I see you're doubling down. I'm coming with you. It was evidence of the true level of Granger's fatigue that she did not argue the point. They stepped into the hearth together and were spun and jostled along 24 fireplaces until they were spat out at the Mitre. Draco was quicker to find his footing than the exhausted idiot of a witch, who made a brave attempt at standing that was more of a sideways collapse into him. He snaked an arm around her waist and apparated them to her kitchen. An orange blur whizzed into the room as the crack of Draco's apparition echoed. There was an immediate meow of concern as the cat noted the sagging form of his mistress against Draco's side. Are you still with us? Asked Draco, giving Granger a jostle. Should I call someone? Should I take you to St. Mungo's? Say something, or I shall send my Patronus to Potter and launch a whole-scale panic. Don't. Granger's grip on his arm tightened. It's just magical exhaustion. I spent all day healing. The long-distance apparitions were stupid. Give me a replenishing potion, the reddish vial on the worktop, there. Draco propped Granger up on a chair, where she sat back with a sigh. He floated the vial in question towards them and snapped off its waxy stopper. "I'm the utter crumpet," said Granger, before downing the entire thing. Draco felt that he ought to get that in writing. The cat was winding its way about Granger's feet with a chorus of anxious meows. "I agree," said Draco. "She needs rest." "You don't understand him," said Granger, dropping the empty vial onto the table with a feeble gesture. "Stop pretending. He said there's a sofa somewhere under the mess of books in the front room that you should go lie down on." "Do not touch those books," said Granger, combative even through her faintness. The cat made a sustained wail. "Bed, then." "I concur," said Draco. Draco didn't give Granger a chance to object. He slipped one hand into the crook of her elbow and apparated them both upstairs, where he deposited her onto her bed. It was obvious, as he looked around the dim room, that Granger had indeed departed in as much of a hurry as she'd claimed to. The bed was in disarray, as though she had forgotten that she had a blanket over her when she'd leapt to her feet. The bedside lamp was askew as though she'd hit it. Her Muggle mobile device was face down on the floor. Draco rearranged these things with a few wand waves. The cat, which had bounded up the stairs after them, leapt onto the bed and joined Granger with a reproachful sound. The cat settled into Granger's armpit like a furry water bottle. Granger pulled the cover over herself with a weak hand and stroked the cat's head with the other. Draco, who had been waiting to see if the replenishing potion was having the desired effect, and that Granger wasn't going to die on his account, suddenly felt as though he was intruding. He took a step towards the door. "Right. I'm going to go now. Mind you don't do that again." "I'm sorry," said Granger. "For being complicated. About your house." "I don't care," said Draco. "It doesn't matter. I know that the awful things that happened there are ancient history. You don't need to keep excusing yourself. Go to sleep," said Draco, taking a bigger step towards the door. "I know it's not rational," said Granger, making an irresolute gesture to the ceiling. "But—" "Stop thinking, Granger," said Draco, even though he knew that was an oxymoron of a request. He walked out of the room. "Bye." "It was just to use the flu," said Granger, softly, mostly to herself. "Now. Bit pathetic, really." Draco took a long step back into the room. Somehow, he couldn't let that one slide. "It's not pathetic to not want to revisit the place where you were tortured." He wanted to add, "You idiot," but he felt that he may have maximized his quota on that front, tonight. Granger said, in an absent way. "Anyway," said Draco, "much of the manor was destroyed at the end of the war. That entire half is gone. The drawing room is gone." "It's gone?" asked Granger of the ceiling. "Yes. It's just gardens now. Greenhouses. Flowers, medicinal herbs." "What herbs?" asked Granger. Why did she have to know everything in excruciating bloody detail? She was exhausting. "I don't know," said Draco. "My mother donates the useful stuff to apothecaries. Go to sleep." "That's good." Granger's voice had taken on a softer, more absent quality. The replenishing potion was knocking her out to begin its work. "Yes. I'm happy that something good could come out of such a terrible place?" supplemented Draco. "Yes." She said nothing further for a few moments. The moonlight through the window caught her face in soft light, delicate, wide-eyed, still pale. Her hair was a dark coil across the pillow, slowly unfurling. Draco felt as though he were seeing double. In her oversized jumper, tucked up in bed, with her hands over the blanket, she looked like the girl he remembered from school. But that vision dissipated to leave him with this portrait of a lovely, tired witch, who had brought herself to the brink of total magical depletion to get to him, because she thought he was in danger. She had done this to herself for him. It was a peculiar sensation. Granger's eyelids began to drift downwards. Draco edged towards the door, intending to leave the cottage by foot before disapparating outside as quietly as he could. She was asleep now, certainly, she'd been quiet too long. "Malfoy?" Draco muttered a curse. "You're meant to be sleeping." Now her words were blurred at the edges. She was drifting towards unconsciousness, but still fighting it. "Your Patronus is lovely," said Granger. Her eyes were closed. Thanks. What is it?" "Go to sleep, Granger." "But what is it?" "Sleep." Is it a kind of dog? Yes. Go to sleep. What kind? A borzoi. Oh. The Tsars used to have those. They did. Go to sleep. This isn't a pub quiz. He's a rude thing, though he's pretty. I'm leaving now, said Draco. His fur looked so soft. Finally, silence fell. Now only the cat was awake, staring at Draco. Draco noted that the yellow stare was not as hate-filled as it usually was. If anything, it seemed approving.